folks. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good that you're here with me. Good that we can have a conversation. I had a lovely snow day after we had a huge snowstorm here in New York City, and my office closed down for the day. I worked from home. I was on the radio. I did some Sputnik 8 radio interviews. I was on Political Misfits. I was on the Critical Hour with Garland Nixon and Dr. Wilmer Leon. And now I'm here with all of you. So I think that's a great way to spend the evening. It is 9:30 here in New York City. I am sitting in my lovely bedroom here in New York City, in my lovely Brooklyn apartment, and we are going to have a conversation here for the next little bit, and it's going to be fun. So welcome. Glad you're here. Glad you're here. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell so that you find out about the next time we do this. Post this on Reddit. Post this on Facebook. Post this on Twitter. Post this on Bunker Chan. Post this wherever videos are posted. Bring your friends. Bring your family. Post this in your favorite group. Invite everyone. We are going to have a great time. Buckle up. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. So I'm glad you all are here. The format that we do, we generally, the way we do things is that we have opening remarks from me. As people ask questions, I write them down. I write down your super chat questions in my lovely notebook here with my lovely pen. Then we do our roll call, where I just call out everyone in the chat, names and locations. That's like the halfway part. And then I spend the rest of the show answering your questions. So the show keeps going as long as your questions keep rolling in. So the more super chat questions we get, the longer we go. That's how we do things here. So, if you got a problem with that, that's just the way we do things. I'm just kidding. I'm open to shifting the format. It kind of evolved over time. But anyway, so if you got super chat questions, be sure to shoot me a super chat and I will write down your question. I will give you an answer. It may not be the answer that you want, but you will get an answer. On that note, I will start with my opening remarks. Folks, there was once a member of my family who was urging me not to get involved in communist revolutionary politics. China. Wrote it down. There was once a member of my family who was urging me not to get involved in revolutionary politics. And one thing that they said to me, this was someone from the older generation, they said to me, Caleb, back in my day, there were all kinds of people protesting and being activists. If you want to be an activist, that's fine. No, back when I was a kid, I was always hearing about people marching for civil rights, people marching against the Vietnam War, people marching and being active in the streets and getting involved in politics. CPI. Next events. There was a whole group, I think they were called Students for a Democratic Society, and they were always protesting and being involved in stuff. If you want to be an activist, a lot of people do that. But Caleb, none of those people back then who were marching for civil rights or marching against the Vietnam War, none of those people back in my day, none of those activists were communists. Well, this person in my family was very, 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 very wrong. Bible book favorite. They were very wrong. All those people were communists. Communists have been essential to every progressive struggle in the last 100 years, at least, of U.S. history. Before Dr. Martin Luther King was a household name, before he had even led the Montgomery bus boycott, the Communist Party of the United States had raised the slogan of equal rights for black workers, black and white, unite and fight. They had built the Civil Rights Congress, led by a communist named W.E.B. Du Bois and another communist named William L. Patterson. They actually took a petition to the United Nations exposing the horrors of Jim Crow segregation called "We Charge Genocide." And the Soviet Union gave the American communists and the black community a platform at the UN to expose the horrors of racism. Right? Socialism, music, and art. The struggle for women to get the right to vote. Susan B. Anthony. They've even put on a coin because she was so pivotal in winning women the right to vote. She had a famous exchange with Eugene Debs, the leader of the Socialist Party. She said to Eugene Debs, "If you give us suffrage, we will give you socialism." And Eugene Debs famously said to her, "If you give us socialism, we will give you suffrage." And there was a deep understanding that the anti-capitalist revolutionary movement and the struggle to get women the right to vote were one in the same. During the Vietnam War, the first protest against the Vietnam War, the first national protest, which was talked about by Ho Chi Minh, the leader of the communists of Vietnam, and he acknowledged it. It was in the early 60s. The first national demonstration against the Vietnam War was organized by Youth Against War and Fascism, a communist organization. Long before the liberals and the hippies were marching against the Vietnam War, the Youth Against War and Fascism, the Young Communist League, and the W.E.B. Du Bois clubs, the Progressive Labor Party, they were marching against war. Revisionism or dogmatism. Why is it we always hear about those good-paying industrial jobs, right? Those good-paying industrial jobs. They say that, oh, our young people are stuck in low-wage, short-term service sector jobs. But what about the good-paying industrial jobs? Synthetic left, Jacobin. Well, how do you think that the jobs in the steel mills and in the auto plants got to be good-paying jobs? How is it that auto workers and steel workers and textile workers and meat packers and truck drivers, how is it that they got good wages? It was because of these people called communists. Communists built the CIO. U.S. industries failed. Without subsidies. Communists built the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations. There was the Flint sit-down strike, the Gettysburg of the labor movement, where workers occupied their factory. And the leaders of that struggle, Homer Martin, Bill McKay, the leaders of the United Auto Workers were Communist Party members. Right? Even Walter and Victor Reuther were Socialist Party members. They went to the Soviet Union and observed a Soviet auto plant up close. They said positive things about Stalin. Right? You could talk about the steel workers, right? And how the steel workers across the country were organized into the unions. That was communists. That was communists who did it. Communists like Gus Hall and William Z. Foster, who led the National Steel Strike of 1919. Gus Hall of Youngstown, Ohio, who organized steel workers to shoot down airplanes when they tried to fly scabs into the plant over the picket line of armed workers outside in Youngstown. You can read about the Teamsters of Minneapolis, right? The truck drivers who shut down the city in 1934. They said no scab trucks. And they had union patrols with baseball bats walking around making sure that nobody was going to scab on the Teamsters Union. Jimmy Hoffa. People hear a lot about Jimmy Hoffa. They made a movie about him recently, a movie with Al Pacino. Well, where did Jimmy Hoffa come from? Jimmy Hoffa was not a communist. Jimmy Hoffa was a conservative. He voted for Nixon. But who taught Jimmy Hoffa how to make a tough union? Jimmy Hoffa was trained by Farrell Dobbs and James Cannon. And it was Trotskyite communists who taught Jimmy Hoffa how to fight dirty and how to build a strong union. There would be no Jimmy Hoffa if it weren't for communists. Right? Why do you think the dock workers of San Francisco have a strong labor union? Why do you think it is that the bus drivers of Boston have one of the best contracts in the country? It's because the Boston bus drivers, who are organized into the Steelworkers Union, have a communist leadership of their labor union. You know, the School Bus Drivers Union of Boston is led by Workers' World Party members and revolutionaries, and that's why it is one of the most militant revolutionary unions in the country, one of the best contracts of any major city for school bus drivers. You can go throughout the United States. In every corner of the country, you can see the tremendously positive impact that communists have had DSA, afraid of M4A. You can see the positive impact that communists have had on the country, whether it's in the steel mills, whether it's in the coal mines, whether it's on the docks, whether it's in the meat packing plants, whether it's in the neighborhoods that benefited from once having good paying industrial jobs, whether it's the black community that no longer lives under Jim Crow segregation and the horrors of an apartheid system in the U.S. South, whether it's women who have the right to vote and the right to reproductive choice. You can go throughout the United States and you can see the huge benefits of communists. It was communists who won these things. This is a fact. It was not liberals. It was not progressives. It was communists. COMMUNIST, communists, who won so much of what the American working class has. State Department. What? So much has been won for the American working class by communists. People think that communists just focus on overseas struggles. They're not concerned about events in the United States. They're too busy supporting countries in a foreign land that have adopted the system that they think is ideal. That's a lie. The communists have embedded themselves in progressive and revolutionary struggles. Who do you think the Black Panthers were? Were the Black Panthers liberals? No. Were the Black Panthers anarchists? No. The Black Panthers were Marxist-Leninists. The Black Panthers studied the writings of Mao Zedong and Ho Chi Minh. They had a special relationship with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. They sent delegations to Cuba. They taught classes on Marxist-Leninist ideology. They had a relationship with Gaddafi in Libya. The Black Panthers were a tanky, hardline communist organization. You betcha they were. They were not liberals by any means. They were not anarchist radlibs. No, the Black Panthers were a tanky organization. And the contribution of the Black Panther Party to the struggle of the African American community is something that cannot be ignored. It's something that is so widely understood. What isn't widely understood is that they did it because they had an understanding of the revolutionary science of Marxism-Leninism. They were anti-imperialists to their core. Read the writings of Huey Newton and how deeply he understood revolutionary theories, how he rejected identity politics, but instead developed his very unique theory called intercommunalism, arguing that the communities of the United States, the various nationalities, needed to organize in their own communities first. First the Black Panthers, then the Young Lords, then the Brown Berets, right? And then eventually, the white workers in the Young Patriots organization, the Gay Liberation Front, eventually they would all merge into one revolutionary united front organization that would bring down capitalism. That was the theory of the Black Panthers, who developed their survival pending revolution program. The Black Panthers were Marxist-Leninists and tankies to their core. Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, these were people that definitely understood Marxism and definitely rejected liberal reformist notions. You bet they did. Right? Why don't people? No. You can go through the history of this country. If you want, you can go all the way back to the Civil War. In the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln had a general. And that general in his army a brigadier general was named August Willich. And August Willich was a member of the International Working Men's Association. He was a communist. Joseph Wedemeyer led an entire division of U.S. soldiers that fought against the slaveholders in Missouri, but they were the Ohio 9th Regiment. Joseph Wedemeyer and the Ohio 9th Regiment were a communist division of the Union Army. They were mainly German immigrants, and they sang the French Revolutionary anthem La Marseillaise as they marched into battle, and they used a red flag as their official emblem. So don't you doubt for a minute that communists have deep roots in this country in terms of progressive organizing and struggle. Communists led the struggle against slavery. Communists led the struggle for civil rights. Communists built the organized labor movement. Communists fought for the right of women to vote. Communists, tankies, hardliners, Marxist-Leninists, anti-imperialists. These are the people that built the progressive and left-wing movement in the United States. It has always been the hardliners, the revolutionaries, the tankies, the anti-imperialists, the folks who understood to their core that capitalism and imperialism must be abolished and that a whole new society must be created where the banks, factories, and industries and major centers of power are controlled by the people, that the means of production must be centralized into the hands of the working class, into a centrally planned economy to raise people up from poverty. It has always been those with that understanding who have led the progressive movement in the United States. Always. Service, worker, labor movement. But who have they fought against? Well, primarily they've fought against who? They've primarily fought against the bosses, right? The bankers, the billionaires, the war makers, the ruling class, the owners of the means of production, those who control the commanding heights of economic power. Marxism talks about two classes: the working class that have nothing to sell but their labor power and live only so long as their work enriches capital, and the owning class, the capitalists, those who own the oil wells and the big box stores and the factories and the mines and the airlines and the means of transportation and the means of communication. The owning class, the billionaire banker monopolists that seek to dominate the world and drive entire nations into poverty so they can continue to enrich themselves and drive and grind American people into poverty. Belarus. Right? That is who the working class and the revolutionary movement has struggled against. But there has always been another enemy. And that is the reformist, sellout, manipulative cancer within our own movement. Right? There have been those who preach socialism but practice fascism to preserve capitalism for the bosses. Those who talk like they are revolutionaries, but behind the doors are scheming with the imperialists. Those who always try to convince with left-wing sounding language, try to convince the revolutionary movement to support the latest imperialist war of plunder that the bosses are waging. Those who try to divert the working class away from the struggle to build a whole new society, but instead, Iraq-Iran relations. But instead, push the working class and the revolutionary movement into the dead end of reformism. This has always been a cancer. Those who seek to push the working class off the revolutionary road and into the dead end of reformism and operating as the passive foot soldiers of the bosses. This has always been a problem in the revolutionary movement. And this is something that progressive people have always always had to deal with. If you are someone who believes in socialism, if you are somebody who wants a whole new society, how do you deal with the labor fakers? How do you deal with the union hacks and the corrupt bureaucracy? How do you deal with the sellout liberals? How do you deal with this element that seeks to crush the revolutionary movement while saying one thing and doing another? How do you deal with them? How do you deal with them? That is a question. In some cases, it's necessary to form an alliance with them. Right? During the 1930s, by entering an alliance with the Roosevelt wing of the Democratic Party, the Communist Party USA and the labor movement was able to make great strides, and eventually the United States and the Soviet Union were able to join arm in arm to defeat the Nazis. However, in other instances, it is absolutely necessary to call them out, to expose them, to enter into a two-line struggle where you call out the reformist elements, you expose them, and you lay out the revolutionary message. Different situations call for different tactics. In some instances, it is necessary to form a class collaborationist united front. In other instances, it is necessary to try and form a working class united front. In other instances, it is necessary to engage in ideological battle with political tendencies in the working class movement that are engaging in opportunism. Different tactics are employed in different circumstances, but the goal remains the same. How can we get out of the disaster of capitalism? How can we get to a society where profits are no longer in command, but the needs of the people come first? How can we get to a society where the people have what they need and no more is the economy organized simply to serve a group of billionaires and bankers? How can we get to a society where the people rule and the profiteers no longer are in command of society? How can we get rid of the system of imperialism where a small group of global corporations and bankers dominate the world and beat down so many countries? How can we get beyond that? What tactic should be employed for the purpose of maneuvering to overturn the capitalist system and get to a whole new society? What tactic should be employed in the revolutionary movement? That is the question that has faced so many revolutionaries and progressives and organizers. That has been the question. And I have long maintained that the only way that socialism has a chance amid this crisis that we are in is to change its tactics. Look, folks, during the Cold War in the United States, you had a very big aristocracy of labor. The term aristocracy of labor does not refer to union bosses. That is a misconception. Often if you say labor aristocracy, people think of union bosses. That's not what the term means. Lenin wrote a very important book called Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. And in that book, he referred to the fact that as the billionaire monopolist corporations, as the big bankers are carving out spheres of influence over the world, as they're going to Africa and beating people down and grinding the people there into poverty, as they're going to Asia and destroying people and committing crimes and murdering people and driving people into poverty, as they're seeking to dominate the world with their cartels and monopolies and big corporations, they are able to buy off a section of the working class at home. They're able to give a few crumbs to sections of the working class. And with those few crumbs they give to the sections of the working class at home, they're able to purchase their loyalty. The aristocracy of labor started out in the United States with the division between the skilled workers and the unskilled workers. The American Federation of Labor the AFL, the first major labor union federation in the United States, banned unskilled workers. It only hired what it called skilled workers, or craftsmen, plumbers, pipe fitters, masons, bricklayers, right? If you worked on an assembly line, you were not welcome in the AFL. Furthermore, the AFL was a white union. It was racist. It was only for white people, right? It was a white workers union. They refused to allow black people to work in AFL unions, and as a result of that, black people were kept out of many jobs and many skilled trades and construction, right? And it was this current, by the bosses giving more treatment, giving special treatment, giving higher wages to skilled workers in the crafts and the trades. It was because of that. It was because of that these sections of the working class became more conservative. They began to identify more with their bosses than with other workers. They began to support imperialist wars around the world. They began to think that, hey, if the American capitalists and imperialists can rise, we will rise right along with them. And that was the beginning of what they called the aristocracy of labor. And communists fought against it. Communists organized the textile workers. They organized the workers in the South, the sharecroppers. They organized the steel workers and the lower paid workers against, struggling against this tendency by the aristocracy of labor, the higher paid workers, to be more conservative and to not care about the other workers and to support imperialism. Lenin said that because of this problem of aristocracy of labor, of the working class being stratified, because of that, it was necessary for communists to go lower and deeper to the masses, to get among the working class who get left behind by the labor movement, who get left behind by the corrupt union bosses, to get to the impoverished working masses and organize them. And they did it. And communists organized, eventually built the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations. And they organized those workers in the steel mill, a lot of whom were from Eastern Europe or from Ireland or from Italy. Maybe a lot of them didn't speak English. They were recent immigrants, and they were in the urban centers being worked to death in these sweatshops. And communists said, we're going to organize them, and we're going to build a union for them. They built the CIO. First, it was the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World. Then the Trade Union Unity League, the TUUL, was the Communist Party-led labor federation. And then there was a very glorious moment in American history. You'll have to remember it was a very glorious moment. The American Federation of Labor, the AFL, was having a convention. And it was John L. Lewis, the leader of the Miners Union, who got up at the AFL convention. And he called out the right-wing labor bureaucrats, and he said he wanted to organize the factory workers. He believed in industrial organization. And then he punched one of these AFL guys in the face. He punched him in the face and led the miners' union and the Teamsters to march out of the American Federation of Labor. And with the help of the Communist Party, they had no shame. They had no shame in working with the Communist Party. They set up the CIO, 1935. I was already asked about that, Belarus. And they set up the CIO, right? That was a definitive moment, right? And a few months after the CIO was formed, in Akron, Ohio, rubber workers went on strike. But this time they didn't just go on strike because they had a fear that the plant would be closed down and they would lose their jobs. So the rubber workers went to their factory and they occupied it. They sat down. And in Akron, Ohio, 1935, you had the 1936, you had the sit-down strike in Akron, Ohio. And the CIO, communist-led rubber workers in Akron, Ohio, were victorious because when they went on strike, not only did they have a picket line outside the plant, but they essentially held the plant hostage. They said, we work here. This plant is our livelihoods. We are going to not just let it go. We're going to occupy our factory until you give in to our demands and recognize our union. That was the sit-down strike in Akron, Ohio. And a few months later, in Flint, Michigan, workers at a General Motors plant heard that they might be losing their jobs. Criticisms of anarchism. So they occupied their factories. And John L. Lewis, the leader of the miners' union, he went and mobilized millions of people, not millions of people, but thousands of people to go to Flint to support the auto workers who were occupying their plant. And police the police tried to clear the workers out of the auto plant, right, in Flint. And there was an incident they called the famous Battle of Bull's Run, where the workers in the auto plant turned on the fire hoses of the auto plant and mowed down the police with the fire hoses, knocked over the police. Back then, the slang term for a police officer, they called police officers bulls, and they called it the Battle of Bull's Run because the labor organizers were making all the police officers run by spraying them with fire hoses and throwing wrenches and screws at them, and it was a battle to keep control of their plant. And then the Black Legion, a fascist organization, a Ku Klux Klan-like organization, a group of sympathizers with Adolf Hitler and Father Coughlin, they assembled. The police had been beaten back, so the fascists mobilized to attack the striking workers in the plant. And what did the communists do? They fought off the fascists, and they drove the Black Legion and the Ku Klux Klan and the Nazi sympathizers, some of whom claimed that they were the real socialists, but yet they were willing to scab and try and violently attack striking workers. They were strike breakers, drove them away. And then John L. Lewis, the leader of the miners' union, the mine workers' union, he famously got in front of the factory in Flint, Michigan, and he said, if they send the army into this factory and they start shooting the workers, they're going to have to shoot me. And he ripped his shirt open and bared his strong chest, a miner, and said, you're going to have to shoot me. You're going to have to go through me, the leader of the miners' union, if you want to drive these workers out of the plant. And then the U.S. Army showed up at the plant in Flint, Michigan. The U.S. military marched in, and everyone was very, very nervous as the U.S. military marched into Flint, Michigan. You didn't know what was going to happen. The U.S. Army marched in with machine guns and tanks and bayonets. And people thought this is going to be a massacre. This is going to be it. It's all going to be over. But then something happened that changed the course of U.S. history forever. The machine gun of the U.S. Army was set up in front of the factory, and it pointed away from the factory. The machine gun was pointed away from the factory because Franklin Delano Roosevelt had sent the U.S. Army not to drive the strikers out of the plant, but to protect the striking workers, from the police, from the Ku Klux Klan, from the fascists. Roosevelt sent the military to protect striking workers in Flint, Michigan. And that was a defining moment in American history. The President of the United States not only supported the right of workers to go on strike, but actually sent the military to defend their right to occupy their factory. That was a defining moment. And why did Roosevelt do that? Why did Roosevelt make that decision? Well, it was because of the fact that Roosevelt was under attack. The Nazis and the fascists wanted to remove him from office. Roosevelt was presiding over the U.S. economy. Things were getting worse in the U.S. economy, and Roosevelt knew that the only way he could prevent a fascist takeover of America was if he entered a strategic alliance with the labor unions, with the socialists, and with the communists. And it was because of that strategy of building a united front at the right moment, but holding Roosevelt accountable and forcing Roosevelt into an alliance. It was because of that great victory was won. And after Roosevelt made clear that he supported workers' rights to join unions, after Roosevelt made clear that he supported the right of workers to occupy their factories, the sit-down strike wave exploded across the United States. In every corner of the country, workers were sitting down and occupying their plants, and the bosses didn't know what to do. They had never seen anything like it, and the President of the United States was supporting their right to do it, and it was an epic moment in American history. And it's because of that that the good-paying jobs existed in the steel mills and in the auto plants and in the textile mills and in the meatpacking facilities. If it hadn't been for that epic moment in American history where the Communist Party mobilized, where they stood up to the labor fakers, they entered a strategic alliance with Roosevelt, they built a popular front against fascism, they maneuvered through all of this, trying different tactics strategically. It's because of that we had those good-paying jobs in the steel mills and in the plants. But what happened after World War II? After World War II, there was McCarthyism. The communists were kicked out of the labor unions. And a lot of American workers after World War II, they had those very, very comfortable, good-paying jobs. They had the benefits that communists had won for them on the class battlefield. And they became supporters of imperialism, right? And we know about this. That white picket fence, that house, and that car, that made a lot of white American workers very sympathetic to U.S. imperialism. Made a lot of American workers very chauvinistic. Made a lot of American workers very racist, right? That even though they had to fight their way in to decent wages, when the industrial workers of the United States were absorbed into the labor aristocracy, it had a conservatizing effect on them. And that's why after World War II, they were able to go after the Communist Party and jail the Communist Party, have the FBI infiltrate the Communist Party, isolate the Communist Party after World War II. And the U.S. economy, because the USA was not the only was the only industrial country in the world that wasn't really blown up during the Second World War, the USA was at the center of the global economy. It had a booming economy. And because of that, the American working class became very, very, very conservative. Right? There was still a civil rights movement among the black workers. There were still progressives and socialists who supported it. And when the Vietnam War started and they wanted to draft young men to go fight in Vietnam, a lot of young men said, I really don't want to go die to stop Ho Chi Minh, and there was an anti-war movement. But that was only isolated. That was on the college campuses. That was among the African-American community. But in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, even up into the 80s and 90s, the broad masses of the American people were conservative. There was a hit song at one point called Okie from Muskogee by Merrill Haggard. People ever heard that song? It was a country song. And it was about an average small town where no one protests anything. You know, we don't smoke marijuana in Muskogee. You know, I mean, it's all about average working class Americans hate hippies and protesters. Football's the roughest thing on campus, and the kids here still respect the college dean. We still wave Old Glory down at the courthouse, right? And you saw this, right? And this was how neoconservatism was able to take hold. Neoconservatism was an adjustment of the American right wing and conservatives. And suddenly conservatives were saying that we're for the average American. The average American worker doesn't like protesting. The average American doesn't like people that are leftists. No, the average American is sick of these elitist college kids and these ethnic minorities, and he doesn't care. The average American loves war and militarism and loves police brutality, right? Could TR be more radical? TR. And that was the attitude. Average Americans didn't want to hear it. And communists were forced to adjust their tactics. You read about the early years of Students for a Democratic Society and SDS. They tried to organize unemployment councils in suburban neighborhoods. People didn't want to hear it. They tried to go door to door and organize poverty campaigns. Didn't really work. Students for a Democratic Society in the 1960s, this big leftist organization, realized that 1930s style populist class struggle politics wasn't going to work. That the best way to organize was on the college campuses. The best way to organize was to organize against the draft. The Black Panthers had great success in the black community, where there was a lot of poverty, a lot of anger at racism. And, the communist groups recruited heavily among anti-war protesting college kids, among intellectuals who traveled around the world and understood what American imperialism was really about. But the broad masses of Americans didn't want to hear it. The broad masses of Americans had no interest in this kind of politics. They said, my country, right or wrong, America's the greatest country in the world. If you don't like it here, you should move to another country. Communism is unpatriotic and un-American. Average Americans didn't want to hear it. Average Americans said, communism's not Christian. Communism's dictatorship. We believe in democracy. We're free. Communist countries are not free. Average Americans didn't want to hear it. And that's not to say that folks in that 1960s era didn't try. There was a whole grouping called the New Communist Movement of the 1970s. They were people who'd protested the Vietnam War, protested for civil rights. They joined various attempts to build a new communist party in the United States. They formed many different groups. There was the Revolutionary Union, which eventually became the Revolutionary Communist Party. There was the Progressive Labor Party. There was the Communist Workers' Party. There was the Democratic Workers' Party. There was the Communist Labor Party. There were many different groups. There was the Communist Party, Marxist, Leninist, or the October League. There were many, many different radicals of this period who knew that you can't make a revolution without the broad masses of people, that the college kids on the campuses, the black community isolated and facing racism, they were not going to be able to make, Smedley Butler, a revolution by themselves. They knew that. And it was mainly this new communist movement, these Maoists, right? Marxist, Leninists, people inspired by China, who said we have to get to the masses, we have to build a new communist party. And they spent 10 years trying to build a new communist party among American workers. They got jobs in factories. They sold communist newspapers to their fellow factory workers. They tried to work inside of the unions. Tried to work inside of the unions. And didn't work. But then in 1978, the U.S. economy crashed. There was a big economic downturn. And it was in that moment that this new communist movement was very excited. They said, finally, now we've got our chance. Now we'll be able to win over the American workers. But what happened in 1978? 1978, big economic downturn. But you have to remember that's the time of the Iranian Revolution. That's, the hostage crisis happened, and, Americans were taken hostage in Iran, and they were able to mobilize this right-wing, hysteria, patriotism. And the economy was getting worse. And while the economy was getting worse, all these American industrial workers who were seeing their wages and their jobs go down very significantly for the first major time since the Second World War, they said, look, clearly we need to be more conservative. And Ronald Reagan promised he was going to bring back the 1950s. And so at that point, you had the rise of Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan rallied American industrial workers to become more racist, more pro-war, more chauvinist. He had these hate rallies against Iran that he would mobilize, and it was in the 1980s and the early 80s, in response to this economic downturn, the American working class became more conservative in the face of the first economic downturn. And the communists became desperate. They became very desperate. They did very desperate things. The Communist Workers' Party challenged the Ku Klux Klan to a shootout. And what resulted was called the Greensboro Massacre, a horrendous event where the KKK showed up at their rally and shot 5 of them. Right? The Revolutionary Communist Party would have these adventurist campaigns. They had May Day 1980. They called it May Day 1980. Big rallies that they would have and get beaten up by right-wingers and adventurism. And it was in around 1980 that you had the Great Retreat, where many of these very, very dedicated radicals, Marxist, Leninists, communists from this time period, who had spent so many years in the factory, so many years doing what you're supposed to do and get to the broad masses of people, said it'll never work, and they walked away, and they retreated. And some of them retreated to the college campuses, to academia. Some of them retreated to the labor bureaucracy. Some of them retreated to forming NGOs and getting involved in the Democratic Party. They all went somewhere other than to the masses. They decided that average Americans would never be recruitable to Marxism and socialism. Average Americans could never possibly be won over. So we just have to retreat from the broad masses of people, because at this point, average Americans are just too brainwashed, too right-wing. So we'll organize the college kids, we'll organize the black community, we'll maneuver inside the labor unions, but there's no hope for getting to the average masses of people. That was a long time ago. That was before I was born. I was born in 1987. And this was before I was born this happened. This is in the early 80s this happened. The Great Retreat. A lot has happened since 1981. Between 1981 and 2020, the labor aristocracy, that comfortable layer of U.S. society of well-paid industrial workers who sympathized with their bosses and had pro-imperialist views, the Okie from Muskogee crowd, they have lost their jobs. They have lost their homes. Their kids are addicted to opioids. Their grandkids are committing suicide. Their neighborhoods have roads that are not paved. They are not drinking water that is properly purified. Their living standards have gone down. It has gotten worse amid this pandemic. Unemployment is everywhere. People are struggling. Most adults with children are still supporting their children. Even into their 30s and 40s, they're still supporting them. People can't live on their own. A whole generation has been robbed. Monetarism has been robbed of decent wages and a decent job. Low-wage, short-term service sector jobs are the life that so many young Americans have been forced to live. It is a disaster. It is a disaster what so many people, working-class people in the United States, are living with. And the reality is they continue to take polls that show that socialism and communism are very popular in the United States right now. 1 in 3 Americans says that they believe in socialism. It's actually a decent percentage that say they believe in communism. The polls show that average Americans are ready to hear it. Average working class Americans voted for Bernie Sanders by the millions. Average Americans are ready to hear it. And furthermore, average Americans are against the wars. Poll after poll after poll shows that average Americans are tired of the wars. They are sick of the wars. But the communist groups are all still led by people who've decided that this is not possible. They've decided it's not possible to get to average Americans. The average Americans will never be won over. We've just got to focus on identity politics. We got to focus on doing this intellectual thing on the campuses. Oh, no. Average Americans can never be won over. They've decided. Even though average Americans are capable of being won over, average Americans are already won over largely. They just haven't been organized. The communist movement in the United States has focused on maneuvering among certain sectors of U.S. society and ignored the big enchilada. They have ignored the broad masses of Americans who are ready to resist capitalism, ready to fight back, ready to start moving towards socialism. And of course, the same crowd of fakers, social democrats, Reagan. That same crowd of fakers has now decided that you're not allowed to try and win over average Americans. That populism is fascism. You're a Nazbol. And even though the average Americans are largely opposed to the wars, certain elements have been dispatched in the socialist movement to try and convince socialists to support these wars. Right? The Jacobin crowd, they have conferences where they invite not socialists from around the world, but anti-socialists. People trying to overthrow Maduro get to speak at Jacobin, well-funded Jacobin conferences paid for by the Jewish Communal Fund, a pro-Israeli lobby group. Right? People trying to overthrow the Chinese government are platformed at these big conferences paid for by the Jewish Communal Fund and the Jacobin organization. Israeli lobby groups sponsoring pro-imperialist socialist entities have been mobilized to try and use young Americans who are interested in socialism as foot soldiers in their latest color revolution. Meanwhile, if you actually demand that U.S. leaders, actually improve the lives of Americans, like Jimmy Dore has, demanding that AOC actually fight for health care, they get demonized, right? Well, folks, as much as I spend a lot of time arguing with AOC and Jacobin and Trotskyites and social Democrats and Skippy the Bear and Jabba the Vosh and people like that, as much as I do that, in the end, that is really not going to accomplish very much. It's good entertainment. That's why I do it. You all love to watch the show. And it's good that their arguments get answered. But the only way these social Democrats are going to be defeated is by getting to the broad masses of people. We have to get to average Americans. The only way we're going to move towards socialism in the United States is if average Americans living in Ohio and Kansas and Kentucky and Tennessee and Wisconsin and South Carolina and Alabama and California and Oregon, if average Americans become convinced that socialism is the answer, you're not going to win with the college campuses. You're not going to win with identity politics. The broad masses of Americans must understand that socialism is their future and that socialism is not a progressive income tax. Socialism is not the post office. Socialism isn't starting a worker co-op with your friends where we share our pencils. Socialism is a government of action that fights for working families. It is time to get out of the movement and get to the masses. The broad masses of Americans must come to understand that they have been sold down the river by the billionaires and the bankers and the monopolists, and that the only way forward is for the American people to move against capitalism and become anti-imperialist. USA different. FDR lived. Folks, the same big corporations that profit from locking people in prison, profit from the opioid epidemic, profit from destroying homes and communities in America, in Ohio and Kansas and Michigan, Milwaukee, the same big corporations that dominate the world economy and destroy the lives of American workers are destroying the lives of workers in Syria. They funded terrorists to try and unleash chaos and overthrow a Ba'athist Arab socialist government in Syria. The same forces, the same groups The same big corporations that are destroying the lives of Americans are trying to overthrow the government of Venezuela. They're trying to start a trade war with China. They're trying to preach the nonsensical illogic that somehow Russia rigs U.S. elections, Russiagate. Right? And of course, against CIA. Of course, the hacks at Jacobin are trying to confuse American workers about this. Of course, the Trotskyite scum, who've always been on the wrong side of every revolutionary movement, are trying to confuse workers about this. The only way to get out of this is to get to the broad masses. We need to build a socialist movement that gets to average Americans. As working class Americans are suffering and angry, we have to get to them. We have to get out of the protest cage and get to the masses. That's the only way out of this. It's the only way out of this. Average Americans need to understand that what we need is a government of action that will fight for working families. Mainstream blaming China for fentanyl. That's what we need to do. We have to get to the masses. We must get to the masses of people. That is the only answer. It's the only answer. The only way we can do it is we have to get to the broad masses of the American people. If we don't do that, if we do not get to the masses, there is no hope. If there's any hope, it lies with the broad masses of people. The only way to outdo the socialist fakers is to get to the broad masses of people. And that means changing our message. That means doing things that will win us the disapproval of lots of left book losers on Twitter. Right? Illinois utility shutoffs. Right? That means framing our message in a way that doesn't necessarily appeal to these people. It's getting beyond these people and getting to the broad masses. That is what is needed right now. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. That's what we need. That is what is desperately needed right now. And that is basically what all the fake left and all the phonies and all the identity politics and all of the liberal professor programs and all of the NGOs and everything has been set up to prevent us from doing. We have to get to average Americans who are suffering right now with a revolutionary, populist, anti-imperialist message that gets them to understand the same people that are trying to destroy Iran are the same people that are destroying their communities. The American working class has a common enemy with the working people of the world. And the only way things will change is if the system of global monopoly capitalism, the Atlanticist pathology, the British Empire economic global setup, the Adam Smith global trade system is dismantled, and a new order based on win-win cooperation comes into being. That's what needs to happen. That is what needs to happen. We understand this. Our community that watches these lives, we understand this. And we've published books about this. We're building the Center for Political Innovation. Every day, I get new emails from people that want to be involved, and I plug them right in. We are ready to move ahead. The pandemic is certainly getting in our way. We're moving ahead, folks. We've got our work cut out for us. Only we have the message. Only we have the understanding of what imperialism actually is, about what socialism actually is. We can do it. We can absolutely do it. But sometimes it requires a choice. Sometimes you have to make a decision. Sometimes the role of the individual can be decisive. So you need to ask yourself, how committed are you to this? How much are you willing to do to save the socialist movement and save America from capitalism? Ask yourself this. This is something we all have to ask ourselves with. Because, folks, one thing that I must tell you, and I tell you this with all sincerity, is there is nothing more satisfying than being a communist. It is a great life. To be able to wake up every day and know that you are on the right side of history, that you have given every effort to dismantle the system of capitalism. You have given every effort to expose the lies of empire and to build a new world. That is the most satisfying feeling. It is an absolutely satisfying feeling to know that there are millions of people just like you in China, in Vietnam, in Cuba, in Venezuela, millions of people like you in capitalist countries, Britain, France, Germany, India, that you are part of a global effort to dismantle a heartless and ruthless system and build a new world based on science and reason. It is a deeply, deeply empowering feeling. And it's not enough to just be a keyboard cruncher. Right? When you're sitting there on your computer alone, you can feel isolated. And you can see leftists screaming at each other on internet forums. And it can all just be very, very depressing. Folks, what we need to come out of this pandemic, we need socialists, especially now with the low-income economy and the unemployment. We need socialists to start living with each other. Communities, socialist houses. Young people move in together, have a socialist house where people rent rooms, they live together, and they study Marxism together, and they build a socialist organization together. We need there to be socialist food drives that go on, where socialists are feeding hungry people. We need there to be socialists in every community doing clothing drives for low-income people and single mothers. We need there to be socialists providing services, and we need there to be a socialist community, not a socialist online community, but a socialist IRL, in real life community, feeding people, caring for people, teaching people ideology. That is what is needed. That is what is needed. More than anything, that is what is needed. We need to build a socialist community among the masses. A socialist community that people don't have to go looking for. I went looking for the communists. You know that? When I got interested in communism, I Googled communist groups. I went looking for them. I had to go find the communist groups. I had to track them down. It shouldn't be like that. It should be in every neighborhood, every community. There's a local communist office that has free food giveaways and Friday night programs with speeches and songs and music. There's a house full of young people who live together and hold some things in common and study Marxism together and go around promoting revolutionary ideology together and spending their free time not smoking a bong and not watching porno, but instead spend their free time going out and organizing and feeding hungry people and going out and spreading the revolutionary message and winning people over to socialist ideology. We need to build a socialist community. There needs to be a socialist community that exists all across the United States. That needs to exist. Right? That is what needs to exist. There needs to be a socialist community. There needs to be an apparatus of people who are dedicated to building socialism, dedicated to working for it, and dedicated to building an apparatus, a political infrastructure to bring it about. Right? We need people to be fanatical. Right? This is one of the things that's always annoyed me about U.S. society. One cliche we always hear in the United States is, oh, we don't need fanatics. We don't need, never be fanatical. Moderation in all things. Right? Right? We want people that are not fanatical. We can't have fanatics. Folks, if you had a heart attack, they came in an ambulance, and they picked you up. They were taking you in your ambulance to a hospital, I have a feeling that if your life was on the line, you would want to be treated by a fanatical doctor. You wouldn't say, oh no, take me to a doctor who got average grades in medical school. Make sure the doctor is high on marijuana while he's operating on my heart. Oh, no, 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 no. If your life was on the line, you would want the most fanatical, the most dedicated doctor to work on you. The one who had given the whole of their life to understanding the medical profession. You would want that person to start operating on you. Very drastic circumstances require fanatics. In normal times, sure, you want politicians that are normal. These are not normal times. The planet has a heart attack right now. The planet is having a heart attack. The entire society we're in is crumbling. Now more than ever, we need a political fanatic to start operating on the country. I've often made the analogy. Revolutionaries are a lot like dentists. You ever hear that before? There's a certain group of people that really love dentistry. You know, there's that old, there's that old show, you know, the Christmas special, claymation or something, and the kid is like playing with the doll's teeth because he wants to be a dentist, right? There's some people that are like that. Some people that love dentistry. They grow up, they want to be dentists, they are fascinated by teeth. Most people don't like going to the dentist. I certainly don't. Most people don't like dentistry. We want to stay pretty far away from the dentist unless there's an emergency. But then, you get that cavity that hurts so bad. You have no choice, but you have to go to the dentist. That's how revolutionaries are. Most people aren't cut out to be communists. They're not. Most people aren't cut out to be revolutionaries. Most people are not ready to understand dialectical materialism and Marxism, Leninism. They're not. Most people just want to live their lives and feed their kids and be happy. But they get into that situation where society is coming apart, where society cannot function, where there is an inability to live in the old way, where the society is coming apart. And when they cannot live in the old way, socialist or fascist, when they cannot live in the old way, when society is coming apart, when a crisis is unfolding, in that moment, just like when you're in the moment where you have that cavity you can't let go, in that moment, the broad masses of people say, God damn it, I want to go find a revolutionary. Get out of my way, Democrats. Get out of my way, Republicans. Get out of my way, hippies. Get out of my way, armchair intellectuals. I want to go find an intellectual. I want to go find a strong man. I want to go find somebody who looks like they're powerful enough to get things done. No, they're not looking for pacifists. They're not looking for worker cooperatives in the woods. They're not looking for people that are triggered by authoritarianism. Oh no, when there's a crisis, when people's lives are on the line, when people are hungry, when people are starving, when society is coming apart, they want something strong. They want something powerful. They want a force that is strong enough that it will resolve the crisis. That is what people want. And there's only two kinds of political people who can offer that: communists and fascists. And if we on the left, if we socialists can't get our act together and offer it, we know who will. There's only one way to be truly fanatical about politics, and that is to become either a socialist or a fascist. And if socialists cannot be the source of power and strength that will resolve this crisis, you know who it's going to be. There are two ways forward. One way is social progress. Glad to hear that, Frank. One way is social progress. One way is building up and applying science to the economy. That's one way to resolve the crisis. That's one way to resolve the crisis. CPI. All right, writing it down. That is one way to resolve the crisis. The other way to resolve the crisis is with mass destruction. Mass destruction and death. Right? World War III, that would resolve the capitalist crisis, right? If half of humanity died in the Third World War, that would resolve half the crisis. Mass genocide, right? We just exterminated half the population. That would resolve the crisis. Do we want that? No. The only way out is up. If socialism does not resolve the crisis, the only way available will be mass destruction and death and fascism. The capitalists' only hope for saving their system is fascism and war. If you want to stick with capitalism, get ready for fascism and war. But if you want a way out, socialism, workers' power, a government of action to fight for working families. Those are the two choices before us. I am trying my hardest to build the revolutionary community, to save socialism. And that's the only hope we have. Intelligentsia. Separate class. Going to factories. Folks, so that concludes my opening remarks. I just wanted to get it all out there. Kind of give some off-the-cuff, basic opening remarks about what it means to be a communist in our time. Frank, I saw your super chat, and I really hope you recover. I'm sorry to hear that you had such a serious surgery. You're a good friend of this program, and I'm sure those of us who are religious will be praying for you and sending you positive energy, and those of us who are not give you the best wishes. So thank you for your super chat. We've got quite a few super chats to get through in the second half of the show, but that's okay, because I've got plenty to say, and I'm always able to talk, and so, folks, I hope you enjoyed the opening remarks, and I am going to take a drink of water, and names and locations, folks, names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you, and then we'll start answering the super chats. Let's go, folks. Henderson, Nevada. Max the Saxon, Virginia. Milwaukee. Ryan in Oakland, California. Frank, best wishes. Dayton, Ohio. I've been there. Delaware. What did Delaware? She wore her brand new jersey. Studio City, California. Los Angeles. American Red. Hell yeah, Jenny Lynn. Jess out in Oregon. Welcome. Sulawesi. Vancouver, Canada. City of Angels. Missouri. Springfield. Cincinnati, Ohio. Oshkosh, Wisconsin. West Virginia. Italia. Wisconsin. Allende, Mexico. Nowhere in particular. Bergen, Norway. Bendigo, Australia. David Fox, good friend. Brisbane, Australia. Comrade G in Cincinnati. Illinois, Brian Schaefer. Kieran from San Diego. Los Angeles. All right. Campbell, California. Shaw from Maryland. Socialist Metal Baby. Shaniqua from Buffalo, New York. Good friend of the program. Tacoma, Washington. The Netherlands. Hell yeah, USA. Plymouth, UK, Balthazar in Oakland, Orlando, Florida, Chan in Georgia, Kamas in Washington, USA, Space Coast, Florida, High Point, North Carolina. Thanks for mentioning the Greensboro Massacre. I've been to the site of the massacre. Very important. Do you remember the important message of Khomeini to the youth of Europe and North America? Very good question from the Kimya. Very good question. I do remember that message. Terre Haute, Toronto, Canada, Long Island, New York, Auckland, New Zealand, North Carolina, Chinatown, Popeyes, Melbourne, Florida, California, Washington State, Worldwide Stream, Maryland, Arizona, Parts Unknown, Red Illuminati, Las Vegas, New Jersey, Mosin from Iran, Chicago, Red Sea, Houston, San Francisco, Florida, Washington State, Buffalo, New York, Marissa, nice job, Jacob, Kitty Town, right? Sham, Cleveland, Wasteland, Pencil Factory, Ithaca, New York, Michael, Brooklyn, Tony Swag. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Naples, Florida. The Left Coast, Billings, Montana, Leipzig, East Germany, Etatist, North Nevada, Kevin, Seattle, Matthew, very, very good. Who else is with us tonight? Who else is with us? San Jose non-user is with us. Brazil, live in my house. I live in my house. Herman Cain, Vallejo, California, global audience, Harold Sullivan, Austin, Texas, George Kraft, Madison, Wisconsin. Very good, very, very good. Good times, folks. Belgium. Did you Belgium? No, I forgot to Belgium. All right, very, very good. Very, very good. Very. Lily from Atlanta, good friend of the show. Torrance, California. Very, very good. Mars. I have a feeling you are not on Mars. Santa Ana, California. Very, very, very good. Very good. All righty, folks. All right, I will hammer out these super chat questions. As always, I don't always give the answers that everyone would want, but I will give you an answer. If you have more super chat questions, keep them rolling in. I will answer them as they come in. Great job, Mr. Maupin from NYC. Good. Well, great job to you from Brooklyn. All righty. China is switching to a digital currency. That's a good thing. That's probably a step for the future. I know Venezuela has made a lot of money with a digital currency. I think that's a great thing to do. I don't understand it as much as I should. But it's worth looking into. There you go. CPI next events. It looks like our next internet web conference will be live on the 27th. That looks like the date that we're going to have our conference. That's the date we picked, is the 27th. And we are having planning calls. If you'd like to be included in that, just send me a message. All right. Favorite book of the Bible would be the book of Acts. All right. The book of Acts in the New Testament. In which Christ, it's Christ ascends into heaven, and then the early stages of the church are established. And there's a lot you can learn about how the early Christian church was formed. The New Testament of the Bible is divided into, three-ish sections, right? First, you have the Gospels, right? The various accounts of the life of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. After that, you have the book of Acts, the Acts of the Apostles, which is about the founding of the church. And then you have the letters, right? All the letters, all the polemics, basically, between the early church leaders. And it's, the Apostle Paul is arguing, not the Apostle Paul, but Paul is arguing with people about different things. And then you have the book of Revelations is how it ends. So really, the New Testament, I think, is worth studying just as a historical document. Please talk about Erdogan. He's causing problem for Iran. You're referring to the leader of Turkey, Erdogan, or I mean, okay, Erdogan. All righty. So yeah, I mean that's my understanding of the Christian Gospels, and I study the Christian Gospels. I think that there's a lot one can learn from them. All right, socialism, music, socialism through music and art. Absolutely, right? I mean, like I've said, socialist music, socialist art is very, very important. I love socialist folk music, and I think we need more art and music that is socialisty. I am all for that. And I think that that's one problem with the socialist movement, is that if you go to a communist meeting, it tends to just be speech after speech after speech. I always insist on having at least one musical performance, someone reading poetry. You need to have culture at your political meetings. There need to be musicians. There need to be poets. There need to be skits and one-act performances. You cannot only have speeches at a socialist event. It ruins everything. That a socialist meeting. I have a video on here, how to have a socialist meeting. Caleb, can you spill the tea on AOC blackmail? Oh boy. All right. AOC blackmail. Stick around, folks, because I'll tell you what I think. All right. AOC blackmail. Very good. All righty. And yeah, I think we need more culture at socialist events. Absolutely. Revisionism or dogmatism? Well, folks, I mean, the thing is, revisionism, the reason it's revisionist is because it takes the revolutionary edge out of Marxism. It reduces Marxism to being a non-revolutionary movement and a movement that is pro-imperialist. But revisionism is not simply revisionist in the sense that it revises it. You know, Lenin revised Marx in a lot of ways, but he was not considered a revisionist because he kept the revolutionary element, right? And that dogmatism is never good, right? Dogmatism, where you're blindly following something. Well, Marx said it, you know, I believe it, that settles it, right? I joke about how in my little town in Ohio, people used to have bumper stickers that said, God said it, I believe it, that settles it. Well, that is how an evangelical fundamentalist feels about the Bible. That is not how any Marxist or scientific socialist should ever feel about any concept. I say we should study Marx, Lenin, you know, Bolivarianism, Baathism, Mao, Islamic socialism, Gaddafi. You know, we should study every revolutionary tradition, but blindly follow none of it, right? You know, we become revisionist. Revisionism is when it stops being a revolutionary movement, when it becomes a movement to adjust the existing system, right? That's Edward Bernstein. He actually coined the term revisionism, and I have a whole video explaining what that is. And Edward Bernstein argued that he said the movement is everything, the goal is nothing, right? That socialism is merely the sum of reforms, and that is revisionism, right? That's what that is. All right. The synthetic left, are they neo-Jacobinites? Well, you know, I've often said that the problem plaguing Marxism is the curse of the revolutionary intelligentsia, that coming out of the French Revolution, there was a current that developed in Europe after the French Revolution. That was, you know, the revolutionary intelligentsia, intellectuals, you know, college students, middle class people who were attracted to revolutionary ideas because they wanted chaos, because they were angry at injustice. Revolutionary intellectuals tended to be operating in urban areas among the middle class, near universities and academia. And that current, that's where socialism originated. Karl Marx was one of these people. That current is particularly bloodthirsty, and that current is particularly out of touch with average people. And that it's Eurasia and Russia and China that saved socialism from that thinking. And that Trotsky very much is an incarnation of trying to keep socialism in the revolutionary intelligentsia. The revolutionary intelligentsia is where the socialist movement originated, but in the 20th century it moved out of there. Stalin moved Russia away from the desire for chaos and the middle class elements of the revolutionary intelligentsia. He built a socialism that was for average people. And China has done that as well. And that for socialism to survive, it needs to leave the revolutionary intelligentsia, right? That Greenwich Village politics, the middle class revolutionary intelligentsia is not going to make a revolution. It's the broad masses of people who make revolutions. And so because of that, there is a desperate need, for the socialist movement to move away from middle class stuff and get to the masses and stop trying to be part of the revolutionary intelligentsia and become part of the broad masses of people. I was kind of trying to make that point. In my book, City Builders and Vandals, I make that point. And the Jacobins, right, the leaders of the French Revolution, they are kind of originated the revolutionary intelligentsia. The left actually comes from their name. The Jacobins sat on the left side of the French National Assembly, whereas the Girondists, the more conservative faction of the French Revolution, sat on the right. That's where left and right come from. So in a way, you could argue that synthetic leftism is neo-Jacobinism. It's a little bit of a stretch, but I'll give it to you. All right. U.S. industries, would they fail without subsidies? They already, we saw that, right? The big four auto companies, they almost went under. Max here, if you're in the DC area and you want to organize, we have a SINA branch, email me. Yeah, if you're in the DC area and you want to be involved in the youth group, Students and Youth for a New America, send an email to Max the Sachs, because he's an organizer. And there's some Students and Youth for a New America. It's a great activist group. There's people in New York. There's people in Illinois, a longtime chapter at a very small college in Illinois that's been doing a lot of work. And it's great. It's a youth group that's kind of involved with CPI and such. It's a good group. Anyhow, but yeah, I mean, the U.S. government subsidizes industries. The military spending is largely a subsidy of U.S. industry, right? But at the end of the day, U.S. industries still function according to profit, no question about it. Alrighty, alrighty. Why is the DSA afraid of Medicare for all? Well, the DSA, I don't think the whole DSA is afraid of Medicare for all. Most people in the DSA are just average Americans like you and me who got interested in socialism. And DSA is the big group that's around. And especially if you're not in an urban center, if you're not, near a university, if you're not in New York City, you're not in Chicago, if you're in a small town, if you're in Kansas, you're in Iowa, the only show in town for socialism is going to be DSA. So your average DSA member joined DSA because they want Medicare for all, and is in DSA because they're the only show in town. You want to do socialism, that's what you can do. I remember, when I was a kid in Orrville, Ohio, and I was in this little town, I was getting interested in Marxism. But I mean, the nearest Marxist groups were 2 hours away in Cleveland, and I didn't have a car, and so I would go to Democratic Party stuff. I would go to MoveOn.org house parties sometimes because it was around, right? When you're among the broad masses of people, you don't always have the access to every obscure revolutionary trend that people that are in intellectual centers or urban centers have. And so most people in the DSA, I don't think, are afraid of Medicare for all. The people in DSA that are ridiculing Jimmy Dore right now, and all of that element, they are the people that kind of dominate DSA, and they have the money, the big foundation money, and all of that. Those folks, they don't like what Jimmy Dore is doing because they're afraid of turning up the apple cart, right? They don't want there to be an actual class struggle that will break out, right? That's the problem, is that the misleaders, right? The foundation funded, Jacobinite, DSA, socialist fakers, Michael Harrington current, those folks are very, very much, they are afraid of losing control. They're afraid somebody like me or somebody like you, could have sway in the socialist movement. This is their gig, and the capitalists have no problem with them running the socialist movement because it won't go anywhere, and because it'll help serve imperialism. It'll help their foreign policy goals. But they know if the socialist movement actually gets moving, if it actually gets into motion, right, they could lose their position, right? This is their gig that they carved out for themselves. There's a carefully and quietly controlled socialist movement in the United States, and the imperialists and the Jewish Communal Fund and Israel, the Israel lobby, and the State Department have appointed them to lead it. And as long as it's just this calm thing and an AOC gets elected here and there and doesn't do anything, they can stay in charge of it, and everyone can listen to them, and they can help. They've made a deal with the imperialists that they'll help sell their color revolutions around the world. And it's their gig. They're just like labor bosses, right? Labor union bureaucrats have a similar operation, right? They run the unions. As long as the labor movement doesn't get too radical, right? As long as the members are paying dues, they sit at the top of the labor. It's their gig, right? And they don't want that. If the socialist movement gets too out of control, if the socialist movement really explodes and there's a real anti-imperialist revolutionary movement, they'll lose control of it, and they know that, right? That they're not qualified to actually lead any revolutionary movement. Their job is to control and contain, and to help manipulate the socialist movement to serve imperialism, right? These are Shachtmanite Trotskyites, right? These are fake socialists, and they have been put in that job for a reason. So, what is this? Mein Kampf. Oh, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Mein Kampf, right? I've read Mein Kampf. We'll talk about it. Probably get this video demonetized, but whatever. I mean, whatever. All right, we'll talk about Mein Kampf. All right, and the socialist movement, has largely been controlled and contained by these folks, and if it actually starts to explode and actually get things done, they're going to lose control of it, right? And they'll lose their gig running the socialist movement. What can be done? Similar question. Get to the broad masses of people. We need socialist houses to come together. We need people to start living together and having a socialist community together. We need to form the Center for Political Innovation. We need to get real populist socialist agitational literature out to the broad masses of people. We need that to happen. We need to oppose fascism. We need to oppose racism. And we need there to be a socialist community all in little towns and little neighborhoods and across the United States, there needs to be socialist houses and socialist offices and there need to be socialists, going around the country, door to door. Hey, knock, knock, knock. I've had my door knocked on by the Jehovah's Witnesses. I've had my door knocked on by the Mormons. I've had my door knocked on by hustlers from the latest, community, fundraising thing. Wouldn't it be great if someone knocked on my door and said, "Hi, we are Marxists, and we would like to talk to you about socialism and why socialism can save the country"? That would be amazing, right? And I think the socialist movement would be so much better if people were knocking on doors, right? And not knocking on doors and saying, "Hey, have you considered voting for a Democrat?" But instead knocking on doors and saying, "Have you heard about socialism? Have you heard about the revolutionary movement? We're having a socialist meeting tonight. I know some people in the neighborhood are short on food. We're having a food giveaway here in the neighborhood." Imagine if socialists were doing that kind of community work and organizing, right? We could really get things done. All righty. Trust vaccines. Alrighty. Why don't people know that the Black Panthers were Marxist-Leninists? Because there's been a huge effort to cover that up. Right? And because there is this stupid assumption on the part of very naive people that nobody good, Vosh, he goes, "Oh, I love the Black Panthers. I love the Black Panthers. But anyone who supported Mao, anyone who supported Stalin, anyone who supported Gaddafi is evil, is the same as a Nazi." Well, the Black Panthers, they supported Mao, they supported Stalin, they met with Gaddafi, they went and met with North Koreans. Black Panthers were tankies, right? But Black Panthers are trendy to support now because they're not around. If they were around now, right, Vosh and all of them would hate them because they're always, just like Jacobin, they're always on the wrong side. But now the Black Panthers, they were, killed and they're gone, right? Because the Black Panthers are gone and they were wiped out by COINTELPRO and the original Black Panther Party no longer exists. Because of that, they can, iconize them, just like they iconized Susan B. Anthony, right? Susan B. Anthony was a revolutionary and a socialist, but now she's on the $1 coin, right? She's not a threat. When revolutionaries are dead, they are no longer a threat, and you can co-opt their legacy. Dr. Martin Luther King, now he was never a communist, but he did openly call for socialism in the final years of his life. He said we needed to get rid of capitalism, and he said the greatest perpetrator of violence in the world was the U.S. government. But look, now they've got a national holiday. The right wing tries to claim him, and they've done their best to obscure the fact that Martin Luther King advocated socialism. This is what happens, right? So with the Black Panthers, they're gone. And so now, they've got a bunch of ID poll college professors writing books about them, and they've got little documentaries about, and they've done their best to just cover up the revolutionary aspect of the Black Panthers. A lot of people buy it, and people think that the pro-imperialist understanding of global politics, people think that that's common sense, right? It's common sense to hate China, common sense to hate Russia, sense to hate Libya, common sense to hate Iran. Well, it's not. It's actually not common sense. There's a whole reality beyond the propaganda of American mainstream media, right? And yes, Lenin does talk about it in State and Revolution on the first couple pages, Lily. And yes, Nelson Mandela was also a tankie. But yeah, I mean, this is what happens. So this is a process that happens. So there you go. Service worker labor movement. Well, look, folks, I will tell you that one of the saddest things I've ever experienced, is coming out of Occupy Wall Street. The Bitcoin. All right. Bitcoin. Coming out of Occupy Wall Street, there was a lot of talk about low-wage workers. And I saw the labor bureaucracy in New York City, the labor bureaucrats, the AFL-CIO and all of them. They started making noise like they were organizing fast food workers. And they would organize like a fast food strike. And so what happened, though, was they would set up like a stage and get a permit and have a rally outside of a McDonald's. And they would get all their like union activists to come there, and they'd have like 3 fast food workers who were available for interview. But at the end of the day, very few fast food workers were actually organized. It was theatrics, and they'd have these rallies. Oh, the fast food workers are on strike. They'd have all the local Democrats come out and give a speech. "I will raise the minimum wage to $15. Fight for the fast food workers." very little actual organizing went on. It was theatrics, right? It was theatrics largely. It was just they had these Democratic Party rallies outside of fast food restaurants and pretended that there was actually organizing going on. It was really sad. Now, there was actual organizing that went on in a number of places. And there were some socialists who kind of used that moment to say, okay, well, the labor bosses are faking it. We're going to do it for real. So there was real organizing in a number of places. But in many places, these strikes weren't actually strikes. It was like theater. It was like performance art. It was very sad. And they just had Democratic Party rallies pretending they were strikes. It was very sad, but service workers have a very hard time, and there's many examples of like a McDonald's being closed after the workers vote to unionize, and who knows? Maybe a winning tactic would be the revival of the sit-down strike, right? I mean, maybe that's I'm sure there's people in the labor movement who've considered that, right? At this point, yeah, if you're going to really seriously organize service sector workers, what the labor bureaucracy is doing is not working. Now, there's the sit-down strike thing. There were public window and door makers when they did a sit-down strike. That was a big deal right after Obama got elected. And there are different tactics that could be used, right? But it seems like the labor bureaucracy in the United States is very afraid of unleashing service workers. Belarus. Well, Belarus, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Belarus never had a counter-revolution. The industries remain nationalized. The Communist Party is the largest political party represented in the parliament. Lukashenko is somebody who is calls himself a communist and quotes Marx and Lenin in his speeches and quotes Stalin and such, and that Belarus has largely kept intact the socialist system. It's the last Soviet republic. That's what it's largely been called, and if you look at their economic model, it is and Hugo Chavez went to Russia and he went to Belarus and he talked about how the economic model of Belarus is very much a socialist one. It's very much a socialist one. They have corruption there. There are some generational problems in the leadership. I think a lot of the people that are protesting have legitimate grievances. But at the end of the day, Belarus is not a capitalist country. Lukashenko's government controls the means of production, and the Communist Party is the ruling party, and they consider themselves to be socialist, and the Communist Party is there, and Lukashenko calls himself a socialist and has called himself a communist in many speeches, and it's a conservative. It's culturally conservative, very anti-gay. Well, not very, but there is some serious homophobia in the government there. There's some anti-Semitism there. That's not good. But at the same time, Lukashenko. I think Belarus is a socialist country, I would say. All right. Iraq-Iran relations post Saddam. Yeah, well, after the overthrow of the Iraqi Ba'ath Socialist government, after that, there was a huge effort by the U.S. imperialists to divide the population, to play the Sunnis against the Shias. And in fact, one thing that was done was that immediately the U.S. government, the USA set up in Iraq, immediately put on everyone's ID their ethnicity, their religious ethnicity, Shia, Sunni, Christian, etc. And they started assigning government jobs on that basis, trying to do everything they could to divide the population. Meanwhile, the U.S. occupiers looked the other way, while Saudi Arabia sent all of its fanatical Wahhabis into Iraq. And the fanatical Wahhabis that were supported by Saudi Arabia, they set up shop in Iraq, and they started dispatching their members out to kill Shia Muslims. And in fact, the Wahhabis of Iraq, many of them believed that if you kill 7 Shia Muslims, you are guaranteed to get into heaven, no matter what you do for the rest of your life. And so, like the story was, like in a mosque, there'd be a number of people praying, and then there'd be 2 guys just sitting in the back. And why are they sitting in the back? Well, the imam said that because they killed 7 Shia, they're good. They don't have to pray anymore because they are good. They're guaranteed to go to heaven because they killed 7 Shia. And the Wahhabi death squads were sent to Iraq to rile up the Sunni community. The USA, Ahmed Chalabi, and appointed like a Sunni government, to run Iraq. And so the Shia community was under attack. There was a very important religious site in Iraq that was blown up. A very important religious site was destroyed. And because of that, Iran has had, Iran borders Iraq. Iran has a Shia government. It's a Shia Muslim government, right? The Islamic Republic. So Iran has given lots of aid and support to Shia Muslims in Iraq, so they don't get killed. On top of that, Iran has given a lot of support to the Iraqi government to help stabilize the country. And the various presidents that have come in, the USA does not want there to be a government in Iraq that is sympathetic to Iran, but various presidents have come in and they come into office and they say, "Oh, we hate Iran." But then after a couple years, they start negotiating with Iran. Iran starts helping them. So then the USA will put pressure and they'll step down. A new president will get in Iraq and he'll be like, "I hate Iran." And then, after a couple years trying to run Iraq, he'll say, "Gosh darn, we need help from Iran." And so Iran will help him. And this is like a pattern, right? Is that Iraq has a Shia majority, and the Wahhabi death squads are everywhere, and Iran is the neighbor, and there's a big big population of Iraqis who are sympathetic to Iran and the Islamic Revolution. And so various Iraqi governments become sympathetic to Iran. And it's not because Iran is imperialist or trying to take over Iraq, like Trump said in his speech. It's because of the fact that the USA is able to keep Iraq under its grip by fomenting ethnic unrest and fomenting religious sectarian violence. And because of that, because the Iranians don't want to see their neighbors in Iraq become, killed. Furthermore, because Iran does not want instability on its borders, right? Iran very much prides itself on the fact it's been the most stable country in that region. It's very safe. I mean, there aren't terrorist attacks in Iran. There's not civil war in Iran. Iran is quite stable and safe. Because of all of that, the U.S., the Iraqis continue to get closer to Iran, and then the USA can't stand it. The USA says, "Hey, we invaded, we overthrew your government. You're not allowed to become sympathetic to Iran. We hate Iran." Well, Iran wants a stable Iraq. It is in Iran's interest for Iraq to be stable. It is in the interest of U.S. imperialism for Iraq to be unstable. Well, if you're the president of Iraq, if you're the president of Iraq, Bothism. All right, if you're the president of Iraq, and you are the president of Iraq, and you want Iraq to be stable, you're going to sympathize with Iran because Iran also wants Iraq to be stable. U.S. imperialism, on the other hand, wants Iraq to be unstable. So the U.S. imperialists are spreading instability around the world because they want the whole world to be poor so that they can stay rich. Whereas Iran, it's a state-run economy, and they want stability, and they see chaos in Syria, and they see chaos in Afghanistan, and they see chaos in Iraq, and they want to keep Iran stable. So they're trying to stabilize Afghanistan, stabilize Iraq, stabilize Syria. The USA wants chaos throughout the world so that they can stay at the top, right? So that other countries are unstable. Iran, China, Russia, Venezuela, these countries want stability so that they can develop independently and build up their countries and raise people out of poverty, right? Imperialism wants chaos and destruction in our era, whereas socialism wants stability. Socialism is not the ideology of the revolutionary intelligentsia any longer. Socialism offers the stability of a planned economy without the chaos of capitalism. And we need to break with the Jacobin, Trotskyite, permanent revolution, destructive current. We need to make socialism about stability and improving people's lives. All right. Already answered Belarus. All right. Criticism of anarchism. I've said many times that my biggest criticism of anarchism is that most people who believe in it don't really understand anarchism. They're not ideological. It's just like a fashion statement, and they don't like authority, and no one can tell them what to do, and they love their favorite punk band. In other ways, I think that anarchism can often, be a cover for being a social democrat. A lot of, like, Noam Chomsky claims he's an anarchist, but he's really a social democrat. A lot of anarchists are anarchists in words and social democrats in deeds. It gives them this cover, I want a world without a state, blah, 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 blah. But if you look at their actual practice, if you look at the tactics they use, they're social democrats. And that's my main criticism of anarchism, is that a lot of people don't even really understand the ideology. And then furthermore, a lot of them are really just social democrats, who like to dress in costumes. All right. Police targeting trans people. That's a big problem here in New York. And in the Vice Squad in particular. A big expose has been published about how the Vice Squad has been particularly vicious to trans people. I marched against the police targeting of trans people here in New York. I participated in many protests and That's been going on for a long time. They see a trans person walking down the street, and there's like a bill being pushed that would protect trans people, because there's like a walking, they call it the walking while trans bill, because basically right now cops go around arresting trans people on the basis of, oh, you're walking down the street as a trans person, you must be a prostitute. Well, no, there are trans women, right, who just live their lives. They're not prostitutes, right? They just, are going to the store or walking down the street. But in these vice sweeps, the police assume that trans women that are walking around are prostitutes because they're trans women, right? And that's not right, right? And you couldn't get away with that with anybody else. They have been doing that in some communities. I mean, if you read some of the stuff that the Vice Squad, this report that was just published about the NYPD Vice Squad and the way they've been operating, has been utterly horrendous, right? And that their sweeps against prostitution have been just going after people. You read in that report, there was a horrendous account of, there was an apartment building, and someone called the police in the apartment building and said the single mom living in the apartment, she's been selling sex to men. So, the police show up at the apartment building and they knock on the door, and they have an undercover officer, and he says, I want to pay you money for sex. And the woman says, go away, my children are here, go away. And he keeps beating on the door. No, I want to pay you for sex. And he keeps demanding it. And she just says, go away. I'm not going to just go away. My children are here. This is disgusting. This is sick. He keeps beating on the door, come on. Finally, she opens the door and she says, just go away. Leave me alone. And they arrest her. And her children are taken away. It's insane. It's insane. And she loses custody of her children. She's taken to jail. And the audio recording clearly has her declining this man. So this cop is beating on the door of a single mother with children, demanding sex with her, demanding that he pay her for sex, and she's saying, get away, get away. And this goes on for such a long time until finally the woman opens the door to say, just go away, and then they arrest her, and then she loses custody of her children. She's taken to jail. This is awful. This is the behavior of animals. This is not civil behavior. That's the same division of the NYPD, the Vice Squad, that has been going after transgender people. They see a trans woman walking, they arrest her for prostitution. Or they see a trans woman walking, they arrest her, and then they search her purse, and they say, oh, you have 3 condoms on you. Because you have 3 condoms in your purse, that's proof that you're engaged in prostitution. And that's not it's not okay. Not okay. All right. Is Teddy Roosevelt more radical than FDR? Well, after he left office, FDR, he came up with the Bull Moose Party, and they had like a very radical, like socialistic economic program. But in office, Teddy Roosevelt wasn't. And even when Teddy Roosevelt was out of office, he was very much promoting imperialism and racism, right? Teddy Roosevelt very much bragged about what a great imperialist he was. And the Bull Moose Party was racist. They were a white supremacist party, even though, this was 1912. So, it's not like, but, Lenin actually wrote about how the Bull Moose Party was almost like a fake socialist party that was invented. It was like a populist movement to take votes away from Eugene Debs. Eugene Debs was so popular, they grabbed a guy from the establishment and they had him, start doing that. FDR was very radical in office. FDR's first lady, Eleanor, actually spoke in favor of civil rights and supported the anti-lynching bills. FDR supported the labor movement. I would say FDR in office was far more radical. I guess, a lot of very dramatic economic moves were proposed by the Bull Moose Party, but they were never enacted. Plus, they were mixed in with racism and imperialism. So it's complicated, but overall, I'd say FDR was a much better president in office and was better. All right, Smedley Butler. Well, Smedley Butler was a U.S. Marine Corps general. And he was in the U.S. Marines, and he was approached by the American Legion and various figures on Wall Street to try and remove Franklin Roosevelt in a military coup in 1934. And he blew the whistle, and he exposed it. And they had congressional hearings about it. It was called the business plot. And the U.S. media tried to make it sound like it was a big joke. But no, it revealed there was a conspiracy to remove Roosevelt in a fascist coup. Smedley Butler then later wrote a book called War is a Racket. That exposed, back then there was a military-industrial complex, just like now, about how war is about making profits for corporations. That was a U.S. Marine Corps general who became an anti-war activist. All right. someone wants me to debate somebody on China, well, send me an email. I'm open to it. I get a lot of requests for podcasts and stuff now, and I'll do some of them. I won't do some of them. I, China is an issue that one has to really understand Marxism in order to debate, and that there's a lot of very snarky, rude people out there who just want to, I don't know. So I'm interested in debating some people, but there are some people who just want to, the workers don't have, direct workers' councils don't control the factories in China, you retard. There's a lot of very rude, arrogant people who want to talk about China. So I'll talk about China with some people, but, there's this arrogant element that is just, you have to really, really, really understand Marxism to understand that why China is socialist. It's not that simple, right? So I might not. It depends if the person is really willing to talk to me or they just want to grandstand, and that I'm not interested in people that just want to grandstand and show off and I've read more theory than you. You're dumb. It's like this is childishness, arrogance, right? I don't want to engage with people like that. Monetarism, that's the economic theories of Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman, he had like the monetarist theories about, you need a federal, it was libertarianism, free market policies, but he argued you need a Federal Reserve to regulate currencies. That's the academic side of Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman, there's like Popular Economics by Milton Friedman, Free to Choose, and, his various like defenses of free market capitalism, but his academic work was largely about monetarism. All right. Reagan assassination attempt. That was John Hinckley. John Hinckley tried to kill Ronald Reagan. And there's been all kinds of weird theories about who he was and why he did it. I couldn't believe it. I watched John, what's his name? The last week tonight. What is his name? John Oliver. John Oliver had this whole thing about conspiracy theories. And he said, there are conspiracy theories about JFK's, but there's no conspiracy theories about the attempted assassination of Reagan. That is not true. There's all kinds of theories about the attempted assassination of Reagan. People talk about Hinckley and his ties to the Bush family. People talk about how a copy of Catcher in the Rye was found at the scene, just like at the scene of John Lennon. That's a weird coincidence. There's a lot of things about the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan that are weird, right? And Reagan was kind of like Trump. He was kind of a populist. The Carter faction was very much a slow growth faction that had presided over kind of making the economy worse, and it was Jimmy Carter was 100% in with Brzezinski and Rockefeller and all of that. And among lower levels of American capital, small business owners and the military-industrial complex, there was anger at the Rockefellers and Brzezinski. And so Reagan came in as kind of an uprising, atomic bombs. USA using atomic bombs. Came in as kind of an uprising against that faction, against the slow growth faction. But then, as a compromise, Reagan was forced to add George Herbert Walker Bush to the ticket as his vice president. George Bush had been CIA director, and George Bush was like a mainstream, old money New England, Wall Street Republican. And so, Reagan and Bush hated each other. Bush had used the term voodoo economics against Ronald Reagan, and Reagan and Bush hated each other. And so it was very sketchy, right? And that, the fact that this guy, who shot Ronald Reagan and tried to kill him, supposedly had ties to the Bush family, and there were divisions in the ruling class, and that Reagan, he was very much about, he was very much that entrepreneurial, American bourgeoisie. He was like Michael Crichton. If you watch my speech about Jurassic Park and Michael Crichton, he was that kind of like, low-level capitalist conservative. He was a conservative fanatic. He was the kind of person, he was endorsed by a lot of people who had ties to like the John Birch Society, and he was seen as like lower levels of capital rising up against the CIA and Zbigniew Brzezinski. He wanted to restore the military-industrial complex, and he was kind of like a Trump. He was like it was a much like a watered-down version of Trump. And that's what Reagan was. And, the neocon element wanted to control him. And he ultimately became, he governed as a neocon. But yeah, the Bush family hated Reagan. Reagan hated them. And it's very mysterious, that whole event. And that's, I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know. I'm not going to tell you why it happened, right? The official story is this guy was crazy. He wanted to impress Jodie Foster or something. But, you know, I mean, I don't know. It's a sketchy thing. And that's, I mean, I'm telling you about the politics of Reagan. Look, the death of Kennedy, right? Kennedy was more like, you know, I mean, was managerial and was trying to control the military-industrial complex. There are divisions in the ruling class, right? And we should never rule that out. All right. All right. Would the U.S. be different if FDR had lived? Yes, because FDR was sympathetic to the Soviet Union, and FDR was so popular, they couldn't have McCarthy'd him out, right? And I think that if FDR had lived, the world would be very different because, you know, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was very, very sympathetic to the Soviet Union and very sympathetic to the Communist Party of the United States. He saw them as good people, and he died at a very convenient time. And if he had lived, it would have been very hard to get him out of office because he was so loved because he'd saved so many Americans. So, you know, I mean, it was, you know, getting Truman to replace Roosevelt was pretty key. The other thing is that FDR was very anti-Israel. You know, many people who worked in the White House said that if FDR had not died and Truman had not taken office, there would never have been an Israeli state. That FDR was extremely skeptical of Israel. I think now FDR was very pro-Saudi. He really liked the Saudi government and he really liked the Wahhabis. So I think it's complicated. But but FDR really hated Israel. And that's why, you know, at the Holocaust Museum, they have gone to great lengths to try and portray FDR as if he was somehow complicit in the Holocaust. And he wasn't. FDR convinced the U.S. public that was reluctant to fight the Nazis. FDR sent Americans to go fight and die to defeat the Nazis. You know, he was told by his generals that he was unable to bomb the trains going to Auschwitz, you know, and so he wanted to save Jews from the Holocaust, and he was told by his military generals he couldn't do that. But he spoke up and tried to allow more and more Jews in the United States to flee from Nazi Germany and to come to the United States, and Congress blocked him. There's a huge, oh wow, okay. I briefly thought Free Speech TV was complete with CBN, National Televangelist Network. Do you know much about Free Speech TV? Are they synthetic left? How could we get your program on national free TV all over the air as material conditions worsen? Wow, okay. Wow, that is a big super chat and a big question. How do you get me on the air? All right. How do we get you on the air? All right. Okay. Yeah, and Free Speech TV. All right. All right. Okay. So yeah, I mean, and Roosevelt, you know, was very sympathetic to Jewish people, very anti-fascist. He was loved by American Jews. But the Holocaust Museum, you know, really tries to give you the impression that Roosevelt didn't care about Jews and that Roosevelt was an anti-Semite. And the reason for that is because of the fact that Roosevelt didn't support Israel. Roosevelt was anti-Israel because he didn't like the British, right? The British Empire and the British royal family, Winston Churchill, they were the main supporters of Israel, and Roosevelt hated the British, right? And this is what you have to understand. Roosevelt knew that the Balfour Declaration and the founding of Israel had been done mainly by the British Empire. And so because of that, you know, he opposed the creation of Israel. And so, I mean, even like the Jerusalem Post ran articles calling Obama anti-Semitic because he quoted Roosevelt, right? And that there has been this huge effort to, you know, the man who convinced the American people to fight Hitler, the man who, you know, tried his hardest to admit as many Jews in the United States to flee from Nazi Germany, the man who got the majority of the Jewish vote over and over and over again, has been declared as an anti-Semite. And that shows, you know, that shows how much the power of propaganda is. All right. Defend socialism against the CIA. Do our own thing, right? Get to the masses. You know, these people are always going to be able to out YouTube us. They're always going to be able to out book publish us. We have to get to the masses, build real political infrastructure. Right. Mainstream blames China for fentanyl. Well, look, people in the United States are making fentanyl, right? If somebody's able to steal, the different parts of it, it's a synthetically created heroin, and they keep finding little labs where Americans are making it themselves, right? Most fentanyl in the United States is cooked up domestically. It's not smuggled in from anywhere else, right? And China has really, really harsh drug laws. If you're caught, making fentanyl in China, they execute you, right? They have the death penalty in China for drug violations. If you're smuggling fentanyl out of China and into the United States and they catch you and you get back to China, you get the death penalty. So that's, there are some chemical components of fentanyl that are manufactured in China. But in order to say that China itself was responsible for the heroin crisis, you would have to, there's no way, especially when people make fentanyl. The criminals who make fentanyl, according to the police statistics, are making it here. They're cooking it up here. It's created in labs in the United States. All righty. All right. Illinois utility shutoffs. There should be no utility shutoffs during this situation. With the pandemic, with so many people losing their jobs, they need to stop utility shutoffs. No one should have their electricity turned off in a time like this. End utility shutoffs. If they can bail out the banks, they can bail out the military-industrial complex, they need to shut off utility shutoffs. Stop utility shutoffs. All right. The future of the USA is socialist or fascist. Yep, you're right. You're right. And with the socialist movement we got that is anti-authoritarian and, and thinks that Jimmy Dore is a big meanie because he's demanding that AOC actually fight for health care. With the socialist movement that we got right now, fascism will win, right? Unless we, those of us on this live, do what we have to do to get to the masses, right? That's what has to happen. Unless we save socialism from CIA distortion and build the infrastructure, fascism will probably come, because the socialism that, do you think that the American people who are losing their jobs and losing their homes, and are hungry and desperate and they want a strong state that'll fix that are going to go, vote for Jabba the Vosh? Do you think they're going to vote for Jabba the Vosh? Do you think they're going to vote for Skippy the Bear? I like AOC in some ways. You think they're going to vote for AOC? Right? If we don't find some kind of American Hugo Chavez real soon, if we don't find some kind of American Gaddafi soon, if we don't find some American Evo Morales real soon, American Maduro, a new Abraham Lincoln, a new Roosevelt, right? If we don't find a strong, constructive socialist movement, right? If we can't build a mass socialist movement that is constructive and patriotic and anti-imperialist and is not this synthetic left death cult, if we don't do it, we're going to get fascism, right? We're going to get fascism, We're going to get fascism. The clowns who currently lead the socialist movement can't tell the difference between socialism and fascism. They're so scared of actual socialism, they think it's fascism, So there you go. Alrighty. And let's not forget that fascism originated as a synthetic left current. George Sorel, right, the ideological father of Italian fascism, was a synthetic leftist, right? He was somebody who was propped up by the French secret police. He wrote polemics. He didn't believe in building a mass communist party. He instead believed in building isolated armed gangs. He was an anarcho-syndicalist. George Sorel, was a synthetic leftist in France, propped up by the French police, and look, he started Italian fascism, right? So let's be real about it. Unless we get to the masses, synthetic leftism doesn't believe in getting to the masses, and when it gets down to it, it just doesn't believe in getting to the masses. And George Sorel, the original anarcho-syndicalist weirdo, thinker who said we don't need to get to the masses. We just need to build cults that go around breaking shit and beating people up. The guy who basically said to the French communists, hey, we don't need a communist movement. We just got to start like Antifa. We just basically got to start our own Antifa, right? That guy, George Sorel, that guy laid the basis for fascism, right? Propaganda of the deed, right? This is, when you start building Sorelian formations, which are, isolated groups of cults that go around functioning as gangs that beat people up and are fanatical and crazy and believe wild, crazy shit and myths and crazy shit. You read Sorelianism, that's what the synthetic left believes, right? Armageddon, pessimism, glorification of destruction, right? I mean, this is, that these people are Sorelian. They're not Marxist, right? Marxists want to build mass organizations among the broad masses of people and communities. And thank you, David Fox. Much appreciated. And I'm going to keep doing the best I can, right? But yeah, we need to get to the masses. We have to get to the masses. All right. All right. All right. The intelligentsia, a separate class? Not exactly. No, I mean, there's a lot of people I mean, intelligentsia refers to a certain intellectual bohemian fringe, but, and they tend to be upper middle class people that come from, a middle class background, but they in themselves are not a separate class, I wouldn't say. And a lot of them are working class. A lot of them are middle class. They own their own business, or, it's a certain kind of thinking of people that are kind of, in this intellectual current that exists, and that exists, like when I lived in Cleveland, right? I lived in Cleveland. In Cleveland, there's a college, very good college, called Case Western Reserve University. It's on the east side of Cleveland, right? West side of Cleveland is white. East side of Cleveland is black. Now, when they started school busing, all the white people on the east side of Cleveland, or on the west side of Cleveland, all moved to the suburbs. So west side of Cleveland is also black now. But on the east side of Cleveland, that is very black. There's this little wealthy middle class area called Cleveland Heights. And Cleveland Heights is where Case Western Reserve University is. And that is where you find the revolutionary intelligentsia, right? And that's where the RCP, they used to have a bookstore there. And the anarchist cooperative, there was an anarchist house that was there. And there was radical left-wing groups that operated there, and it was white people that were middle class that worked at Case Western Reserve University, and they lived, surrounded by the black community, but they lived in an area that was kind of gentrified almost, and they were intellectuals, in that area, right, Cleveland Heights, that was the revolutionary intelligentsia of Cleveland. And if you go to most urban centers of the United States, you will find an area, right, like Harlem, right? In Harlem, you got Columbia, right? And so you've got Harlem, which is a black, area. In the middle of Harlem, you have this very prestigious university surrounded by white people who are intellectuals, right? And that's the pattern you see in cities. And those white people that surround Columbia are not the broad masses of American white people. They are white people that are intellectuals. And it's near Columbia, right? Columbia, that's where all the communist groups were operating back then. They all had bookstores near Columbia. Lyndon LaRouche would give classes near Columbia University. The Weather Underground, their leader Mark Rudd was a student at Columbia University. And near Columbia University, that's where you find the revolutionary intelligentsia, right? And this is how it works. And that huddle of people that are very, very intellectual, all those little bookstores around Columbia University, that's not the broad masses of Americans. That's this weird current you can call the revolutionary intelligentsia, right? And that's how this tends to work, right? You have the broad masses of American white people that are in the suburbs and in rural areas. You have the African-American community that are living in urban centers. And then within the urban centers, you have these little pockets of academics near universities, hippies, and it's not just the left, mind you. Right? Let me add, it's not just communism and leftism and other things, right? You also have what is it? People who believe in Esperanto and want a universal language, and you have people who are into the occults, right? And the Aleister Crowley kind of people that the occult and mysticism, and that the revolutionary intelligentsia, Freudianism, Buddhism, it's this current of people that are very, very smart, I guess, intellectually tuned in, are not satisfied with the rest of society, tend to work near universities or whatever, tend to come from a middle-class background. Drugs, right? They're into drugs and LSD, and it's just this current, right? This current that exists near universities, and they're cut off from the broad masses of the American people, and that's where communists tend to operate in the United States. And that is a dead end. Communists in the United States need to get to the broad masses of people. And that's what I mean by revolutionary intelligentsia. And to be honest, I spent a lot of my life in the revolutionary intelligentsia. And I had to go looking for it. I'm from a tiny, small, working class town in Ohio. I went to Cleveland, and even though I was going to a college in the suburb of Cleveland, almost every day I got on a bus, and I got on a bus and got on a train, and then I would be in that Coventry area, because that's where any left-wing activism in Cleveland happened. It was in Coventry and Cleveland Heights, right? And that's how all this works, right? This is the revolutionary intelligentsia, and I loved Coventry and the restaurants around there and all that. That's the revolutionary intelligentsia. The bookstores around there, I understand that, well, anyway. But, it's just, that area, that's where all left-wing activism happened, in this little white enclave in the middle of the black community, surrounded by a very prominent college and university. And it's where all the Buddhist temples are, and it's where all the, drug LSD cults are, and it's where all the, I don't know, the occult, the Wiccans, and it's just everyone who doesn't fit in with American society, everyone who's kind of an intellectual who doesn't fit in, they go to the revolutionary intelligentsia area, and that's where they hang out, right? And that's where communism is just another thing, right? We used to have this thing, there was this thing in Cleveland every year, they had the Hessler Street Fair. It was a street in this area, right? Was this street in this area, and communists would have a literature table, anarchists would have a literature table. After that, there would be the the Wiccans and the Friends of the Wetlands, and there would be everybody would be there, right? The drug, legalized marijuana, and the LSD group, and the cult of the Hare Krishna guru, and it was just, that was the revolutionary intelligentsia. That's a dead end. That is where, if you want to make sure that you never have an impact in broader society, go there. If you want to get to the broad masses of people, you have to get out of the revolutionary intelligentsia. All right. Okay. All right. Going to factories. Well, the factories, there's not very much industrial production in the United States. Yeah. Erdogan in Turkey. Erdogan is a Bonapartist figure. He's a bourgeois nationalist. Sometimes he goes with the United States. Sometimes he goes with Russia. Depends who makes him a better deal. And he comes out of that Muslim Brotherhood current. He's very anti-Shia. He does not like Shia Muslims. He hates Iran. But I think he favors more negotiations with Iran rather than, he's not like a Saudi. The Saudi Wahhabis want all-out war with Iran, whereas Turkey and Qatar, they want to negotiate with Iran. They still don't consider Iranian. They hate Shia. It's a particular current in the Middle East. All right. So big question. AOC being blackmailed. All right. Here's the thing. All right. I just want to, and I said this on the radio today too, right? Okay, folks, I'm only speculating here. All right. I'm just asking a series of questions, because it needs to be asked. I actually have said this to a lot of my friends and family, and they've said, you might be right here. We just don't know. And at the end of the day, we don't know, okay? I'm just going to tell you some weird things about AOC. Okay? AOC is younger than me, right? She got into office, she was 28, and she's younger than I am. I'm about to turn 33, right? I have been on Facebook since I was a freshman in college. When I first went to college, you still had to have a college.edu address to get a Facebook page. But I've been on Facebook. Before I was on Facebook, I was on MySpace. AOC is younger than I am, right? So, she went to college in the United States. She went to high school in the United States. She's been on Twitter. She's been on Facebook. She's been on Instagram. Every boyfriend she ever had, there's pictures of her with them. Every fight she ever had, every embarrassing thing. We, in the United States, we tweet and we share everything on social media. That is the curse of our generation. We should not be doing that, right? People shouldn't put their mental health issues on Facebook. People should not put a lot of personal things, but we have been trained as a generation. Oh, whatever's on your mind, just post it on Twitter. Just post it on Facebook. Well, do you think that AOC was smart, was throughout her entire teen years, throughout her entire college years, that she was going, oh, geez, I better not post anything. If I do that, when I run for Congress, they'll use it against me. Of course she wasn't thinking that. So the idea that AOC didn't have a Facebook, didn't have a Twitter, didn't have an Instagram, I don't buy it. But you'll notice that it's all been wiped. You can't find anything. But every so often there's a little leak. right? There was, the day she took office, suddenly there was this video of her dancing in college for like a college video project. There was a video of her dancing. That was weird. Where did that come from? A couple months later, there was a video of her giving a speech about Dr. Martin Luther King when she was in college. Where did it come from? I don't know. The media just got it. You know? But other than that, you know, try to find AOC's Facebook and read about, you know, who she was dating in college, her freshman year. Can't find it. Try to find AOC's high school MySpace and the drama going. You can't find it, right? Try to find. There's a lot that there's this, and I guess some people say, well, she just may not have it, right? And that might be true, but I find it odd that there's nothing. Right? There's nothing, right? There's not, I mean, everybody's got a Facebook, and there's pictures of their high school prom, and there's pictures of their graduation, and there's pictures with their great aunt, and there's pictures of their trip, that they family vacation. Nothing. 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 Now, is it possible she just didn't do it? Maybe. Maybe. But it seems to me like it's been wiped. And the other thing is you have to remember that, okay, so you delete everything, right? You take it all down. That doesn't go away. That's still archived somewhere. Facebook's still got it all. Instagram's still got it all. Google's still got it all. You know, but there's nothing. It's all gone. Well, it's not all gone. I'm convinced somebody has it, okay? And my theory, I'm just floating it out there. I think that somebody helped her to clean up her social media and make it all completely go away. But it's very possible that somebody else, or that very person, has said, by the way, it can come out again. You know, you know, I mean, it's weird that that video just showed up the day that she got into office, not during the campaign, not when she was running for Congress, the day she swore in. All of a sudden there's this video, this strange video of her dancing from college. Why that? Why did all the different media outlets get it at the same time? Very interesting. Right? And then there's that video of her winning a speech contest in college about talking about Martin Luther King. Nothing else. Folks, looks to me like when it was time to run for Congress, she sat down with somebody. Somebody wiped it. You can't find it. You can't find it. They would do stories on it. I mean, she so much as burps, and they do a story on it. But it's wiped. Right? Oh, she was a waitress, bartender. Now she's in Congress. Okay. Okay. And then every so often there's a little drop. Like somebody has more than that. There's a lot more videos out there. There's a lot more personal information out there. And every so often there's a little drop just to remind her that they've got it all. Facebook, Google, Twitter, they've got all kinds of stuff on her. She was self-reporting just like everybody else. And it all just went away, but they've got it on her. If she steps out of line, stuff that's a little more embarrassing than a dance video can come out. Stuff that's a little more embarrassing than a speech that she won about Martin Luther King can come out. Now, I mean, this is all just speculation. Maybe AOC has wanted to be in Congress her whole life, so she was smart enough her whole life to never put anything on Twitter, never have an Instagram, never have a MySpace, never have a Facebook. That just doesn't sound right to me. I find that very hard to believe. Having met her a couple times, I find it very hard to believe that when she was 16, she thought, oh, geez, I'm not going to set up a MySpace like all my friends because I don't want anyone to have any information on me when I run for Congress a decade late. No, don't buy it. Don't buy it. I find it very mysterious that there's no, right? And the thing is, right, a lot of people, right, who are not concerned about Silicon Valley, not concerned about, the Patriot Act and all this stuff, they say, well, I have nothing to hide, right? And what they mean when they say I have nothing to hide is I'm not a terrorist, I'm not planning any acts of violence, I'm not breaking the law, I'm not robbing banks. But let's be real, all of us have something to hide. All of us have things that we would prefer our next door neighbors not know about. All of us have things we would prefer not be on the front page of the New York Times. We all have personal things in our lives that we would prefer to keep private. And that if they became public, we wouldn't be too happy about it. I'm convinced AOC is a human being, and it probably has the same thing. And, probably was doing what every millennial, I think she's a millennial, was probably doing what every millennial does, and posted her relationship statuses, and posted all kinds of stuff. And they've got it all. And they wiped it. And who's they? I don't know who they is. But I'm convinced the conspiracist in me, the speculator in me, thinks that maybe the reason that AOC sometimes seems to be a bit of a disappointment is because there are more powerful people than we realize. That have information on her that she doesn't want to get out there. Now, that's a stretch, right? I mean, and who knows? I could be wrong, right? And you don't want to say that thing lightly, right? I mean, until you have a smoking gun, but that's the problem. I realize nowadays, right? None of us have any privacy. Right? Especially with social media. And I really urge people, right? A lot of young people, there's a culture now where young people are having a mental health problem, right? They're feeling depressed, they're feeling suicidal, or something like that. Do not post that stuff on the internet, folks, right? And I've seen this, so many young people, and they do it and they get the wrong message, right? They'll post, hey, I'm feeling really, really depressed, blah, 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 blah. And all their friends will post, I'm so sorry to see you're depressed. We all love you. And they get support from it. But here's the thing. There's a lot of people who see that post and make judgments about you. They don't post anything below. They don't post, oh, I always knew you were crazy. Or, oh, well, they don't post their nasty thoughts they have about you. But they see that also. Right? When you post something on social media, even if it's private, even if only your friends can see it, it's not private. Right? It's not private. And, I think people should be more careful what they post on social media. I see a lot of people that I know who post really personal stuff they should not be posting on Facebook. And I think about AOC, and I think about how no social media, nothing. That's mysterious. And then the little drops that happen every so often, that's also mysterious. Makes me think that maybe they've got something on her. That's what I'm thinking. There's something about AOC that we don't know about, that they know about, and they keep her in line with. PR, social media, this is the future, folks, right? And just saying, right? I mean, it's a little weird. So, there you go. Alrighty. Next question. If that wasn't controversial enough, next question is Mein Kampf, Hitler's autobiography. I've read it. I actually read it. And that's the thing, is most people haven't read it. A lot of people tell you they've read it. They haven't read it. I've read it. Basically, Hitler in his autobiography says this. He talks about he didn't get along with his dad. His dad was really authoritarian. He had daddy issues. His dad was super authoritarian and wanted him to be a government official. He wanted to be a painter, so he and his dad, they went their separate ways. He went to Vienna, tried to get into art school. It didn't work out, so he became a house painter, started painting houses. And when he was a house painter, he didn't like his life. He was lonely, and he was in the painters union because you had to be. I mean, that was the union among painters. Painters union were Marxists, and he thought the Marxists were all stupid and used big words to try and impress you about how smart they were, but they weren't smart and they didn't understand it. Then he got drafted to fight in World War I, and it was the most epic, amazing experience he'd ever had in his life. And World War I was just so amazing, and it was like Valhalla, and he rants and raves about how amazing fighting in World War I was. And of course, during World War I, he was injured and became blind. He then wakes up in the hospital. He can't see. He says he's in the hospital, and the soldiers in the hospital are in the hospital. The soldiers with him are there's other people in the hospital, in the military hospital, who are with him, and he says that they're bragging about how they intentionally injured themselves because they didn't want to fight in the war. And they shot themselves in the foot or whatever. And he's just aghast that these people were such traitors that they would do such a thing. He can't believe that they would injure themselves to not fight for the great Germany. But he finds out these soldiers who shot themselves in the foot or didn't, they were all communists, and they were reading newspapers from communist Jewish people that had convinced them not to fight in the war. So in the hospital bed with his eyes, covered, he finds out that Germany has lost the war, but he's realized that Germany didn't really lose the war, that it was actually stabbed in the back by Jews and communists who are not loyal to the great German fatherland, blah, blah, blah. So he gets out of the military, and he's kind of a homeless, lonely veteran, and he's poor. And at first he becomes a Christian socialist because he hates Marxism, but then he decides the Christian socialists are all a bunch of wimps. They're not big, strong, powerful, scary enough. They're all too nice. So then he becomes a pan-Germanist. Because he wants to unite, Austria with Germany, and so he becomes a pan-Germanist. But that doesn't work. He doesn't like them. So finally, he joins the German Workers' Party, and it's 10 people, and he changes their name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, and now he's got this agenda, and he's going to save the world. That's Mein Kampf. That's what Mein Kampf says, okay? And there's a lot of things that are completely wrong with that narrative. What struck me was that the parts of the book that seemed human, right? A lot of the book is just him trying, and it's funny, he does what he accuses the Marxists of doing. Hitler accuses the Marxists of using big words and trying to make themselves seem smart when they're really stupid. He does exactly that throughout the book. He does exactly that, right? He spends pages and pages and pages polemicizing against every little party and he's trying to write like some like great philosophical work, and he doesn't really have those very profound concepts. The parts of it that were the most human, I thought, were the parts where he talked about being in poverty. He described what it's like to be low income. And he described how when you're low income, right, you don't have stable work, you spend money when you have it, you don't save, right? And he talks about how one thing he talks about in the book is that German parents used to trust the teachers in the schools. He talks about, right? And that, that when there was a stable economy in Germany, kids would go to school, and if they misbehaved, the parents would support the teacher and blame their kids and force their kids to learn to be good. But when the economy got worse, when life was unstable, German parents started to sympathize with their kids and not trust the teachers, right? And, just stuff like that. There's a lot of little anecdotes about being poor, about not having enough food, about being disappointed about not getting into art school, about being angry at his father, that he comes across as a more human person, and that he was homeless. He talks about being homeless, what being homeless is like, and I guess that, he's more human than you would think, right? He comes across as a smart, more intelligent than average German guy who's from the middle class. His father's like a government official, but was part of this revolutionary intelligentsia, wanted to be a painter, didn't really get anywhere in life, kept being kind of a failure in life until the Great War. And this is interesting. You'll hear conservatives and other people talk about how amazing war is, right? Because it seems like, for Hitler, he was just kind of this screw-up son of some low-level government official in Austria. He was trying to get into art school and failed. He was a house painter and, wasn't making much money, and he was, homeless and all of this. But then he gets drafted, or I think he volunteered. But anyway, the war came along, and he fights in the war, and he remembers World War One as this amazing experience, as it's like it's glorious, and it was. I mean, he writes about World War One like it's like it's a Wagner opera or something, and I think he says it's like Valhalla, and World War One was horrible. Like what World War One actually was is horrendous, right? World War One, poison gas. I think he was blinded in a poison gas attack, for goodness sakes. Poison gas, it's chemical warfare. Trenches where people get infected, they get trench foot and their feet are infected. My God, World War One was an absolute nightmare. But he writes about it as if it's like amazing, like it's an action movie. It's the most, and that shows you that he probably had PTSD, right? If someone gets blinded in a poison gas attack when most of the people around you are like, and I think he tells the story of like he was talking to somebody, he was talking to a group of people and walked away, and then all of them died, and he like narrowly like missed, a shell hit the area, and all these people, he just like walked 2 feet, oh, they all died. That he had PTSD. There's no question about that. He clearly had PTSD. And that when people have PTSD of very traumatic memories like war, they tend to split, right? That there was a part of Hitler that remembered the absolute terror of death, of losing his eyesight, of seeing people dead on the ground. But then there was a part of him that said, there was a part of him that would block out that memory, right? And that, when people would ask him about World War One, if you read what he writes about World War One, he sees World War One as just this glorious, amazing event. Well, it wasn't, right? And that, Hitler clearly had horrendous PTSD from World War One, but part of that PTSD was splitting. So he remembered it as this glorious event in one part of his mind, and he remembered the actual horror of a horrendous war in which 20 million workers were sent to their deaths for imperialism in the other part of his mind. And that like one thing people talk about with Hitler is that he did not, for example, Hitler did not believe in hunting, right? Very weird, right? How many people did he kill? Millions of people. He kills millions of people, but he doesn't believe in hunting. And he apparently had this extreme emotional reaction. If there was ever any hunting, he didn't believe in eating meat. And the reason that he didn't believe in eating meat, and the reason he didn't believe in hunting, was because the image of a dead animal or even meat on his plate reminded him of corpses. Now, not only did it remind him of the corpses he saw in the war, but it also reminded him apparently of his niece. His niece committed suicide, and he saw her dead body. So, the fact that somebody doesn't eat meat, right, and then like will have like angry, like screaming meltdowns at other adult men because he finds out they went hunting, like that's somebody with very, very serious PTSD, right? If you think that they can't eat a steak on their plate because it makes them think about a dead body they saw one time, that is some very, very serious PTSD. That's actually how they define PTSD. PTSD is when people, because of trauma, because of their history, they can't do things people normally do, like, eat meat. Hitler was not, he was not a vegetarian for like his health. He was not a vegetarian for like moral reasons, right? The sight of a dead body, the sight of meat, right? The sight of an animal being shot reminded him of horrendous things he had seen. But yet, so he's clearly, he lost his eyesight, but he talks about World War One like it was this amazing experience. He defended and it's like, it sounds to me like he was a loser. He was a screw up. Capitalism in Germany, it was failing. He felt like he didn't have his life together. He had issues with his dad. He was homeless. He couldn't become a professional painter like he wanted. He felt like a lot of young people feel now, right, which is that I can't get my life together because of the economy, and of course he's blaming himself for it and all of that. But then the Great War comes along, a big war comes along, and he speaks of World War One as if it was this epic moment in his life, like the war was the best thing that ever happened to him. That's what came across when I read Mein Kampf, and I was like, wow, this man is, and I see Mein Kampf as a very, very serious case study in PTSD. Um, I mean, he wrote it in the 20s, long before he came to power and all of that. And that the Nazi movement was way bigger than one man, you have to remember, right? And that a lot of that book he didn't write. From what I understand, there was a ghostwriter who actually wrote a lot of that. It was based on his experience, but a ghostwriter wrote it. And, and that the Nazi movement, in a lot of ways, the Nazi movement was about, like, it was like the most mass-produced thing ever, right? The Nazis hated Sigmund Freud and all that, but the speeches that Hitler gave, and you watch, it was the most it was like Hollywood politics, right? The whole thing was so very, very well staged. It was very, very well staged. It was theatrical, and that everything he did was very, very, it wasn't just the work of one man and his ideas, right? It was a personality cult that was very carefully constructed by all the smartest, producers and propagandists of the era. And that in a lot of ways, actually, it was the British who really liked Hitler. British intelligence, right? British intelligence, they funded Mussolini, and they funded the Nazis because they were afraid of the communists, right? And in Italy, the black shirts started getting financial support from British intelligence to fight communists in Italy. And in the 20s, the Nazis started getting financial support from the British to build a counter gang, a cult, to fight the communists in Germany. Then Hjalmar Schacht finally convinced the German industrialists, the Krupps, the Tysons, the German capitalists, that Hitler was better. Hitler was kind of running a weird counter gang in Germany that went around killing communists and beating up communists that was backed by British intelligence. And then, as the crisis in society deepened, as the Weimar Republic, things got worse and worse and worse, instability, attempted communist revolutions, finally the German industrialists said, all right, we'll take the British guy rather than the communist guy. At least he's not a communist. And so Hitler was a counter gang created by the British, right? Like Mussolini. And it was a well-funded, fanatical, violent counter gang set up to fight, the communists in Germany, that eventually, got its own legs and walked on its own and took over the government. That's really what Nazi Germany was. And so, yeah, I've read Mein Kampf. That's what I get out of it, basically. There's a million stupid things people say about Hitler, okay? I've heard people say that Hitler, what was it? Hitler was mad because he didn't get into art school, and there's a lot of little cliches that people say about Hitler, that Hitler was actually Jewish, that Hitler, was a self-hating Jew, that Hitler was, what else was he? He was a drug addict, and that people have all these silly cliches. The whole World War II happened because Hitler didn't get into art school. World War II happened because Hitler used too much cocaine or too much methamphetamine. That huge amount of historical symbolism there, right? There was a crisis in German society, right? Germany lost World War I, the economy was falling apart, communism was very popular in Germany, and there was a real danger that there could be a communist revolution in Germany. The capitalism was in crisis. So the British said, geez, we got to defeat those communists. So they found a fanatical cult that had developed on the right, led by this guy Hitler, and they said, all right, this guy hates communists, here's some money. And they gave him money, and they propped him up, and he had his own armed group that went around fighting the communists. And the crisis intensified, and Hjalmar Schacht met with Hitler and said, hey, better this guy than the communists, and went around to Krupp and to Tyson and to all of them. And the German capitalist class was very reluctant to pick Hitler because they saw him as a screaming fanatic and all of that. But they said, hey, it's either him or the communists. Oh, okay. And the German capitalists, bought him off. And he, after the British had bought him off, I guess they paid him more. And so he became the government of Germany. And that's how these things work. That's a material understanding. And yeah, and was he gay? Come on. Who knows? And it doesn't matter, right? And people want to make it all about personal stuff. It's all about these people's personalities, right? People think history is like a group of friends, right? It's like a group of friends hanging out, right? It's like a group of friends hanging out. My friend didn't get into art school, and that ruined... No, right? And that, Nazism, fascism, the Holocaust, World War I, World War II, these events fit into historical materialism, right? Historical materialism, folks. Dialectical and historical materialism, right? When I saw Jack Ma, I was in the same room as Jack Ma. One of the things he said in his speech that I thought was very, very powerful was that he pointed out that World War I and World War II both came after huge leaps in technology, right? That is a very important point, and that is the problem with capitalist production. Under capitalism, the means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital to make profits. So, and under capitalism, abundance created by technology leads to poverty. Abundance creates poverty. People are homeless because there are too many houses. People are hungry because there is too much food. Huge technological leaps lead to great poverty. That's the irrationality of a system where profits are in command. Okay, do I trust the vaccines? The jury is still out. I saw that, there were the 2 women in Britain who had some reactions. Now there's a worker in Alaska, a healthcare worker who's had a reaction. The jury is still out. Now, to be fair, I am pretty late on the list to get vaccinated, right? First it's healthcare workers, then it's old people, then it's other people who might be vulnerable. Well, I'm about to turn 33, and I'm young, and I'm in good health. So, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. I lean toward I would take it, but, we'll see. If people are taking it and dropping dead in mass, I might change my mind. So there you go. All right. Bitcoin, I don't know enough about it, really. I really just don't know enough about it. It's probably the way of the future. Digital currencies, are easier to track. Some people talk about cash being abolished at some point. I don't think that's good, but I think it may happen. All right, Baathism in Iraq. Why did Saddam Hussein? Look, Saddam Hussein collaborated with the imperialists. He killed a lot of Iranians. But you have to remember, Iran, there's the whole Reagan thing, and, Ronald Reagan, was supporting Iran at some points, and, so, what happened is in Iraq, the revolutionary current was Baathist Arab socialism. It was secular. In Iran, the revolutionary current was Shia, and it was Muslim, and it was religious. These are both 2 anti-imperialist currents. These are 2 revolutionary movements, and the U.S. imperialists played them against each other. That's what happened, right? And that they were not compatible with each other. Iraq had a very big Shia community. Iraq accused Iran of trying to foment revolution among its Shia community, and the Iraq-Iran war was the imperialists trying to play 2 different revolutionary currents in the Middle East against each other. And Saddam Hussein, was supported by the United States, but Iran at various points was also supported by the United States, and that the Iraq-Iran war was the imperialists trying to kill Middle Eastern people, and to destroy 2 revolutionary currents. Tips for studying historical periods or historical events, methods, types, sources. All right. All righty. Okay. And yeah, there you go. So, okie dokie. The USA, why did they use atomic bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Because they wanted to demonstrate to the Soviet Union that they had the bomb, right? The Soviet Union knew, I don't know who that is. That super chat. I don't know that name. But, the USA wanted to show the Soviet Union they had the bomb. They had the Manhattan Project. Japan offered to surrender and wanted to keep their emperor. The USA said no, didn't accept their surrender, then dropped the 2 atomic bombs, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then gave them the exact same deal. They surrendered and kept their emperor. So the Japanese had offered the same deal that they got afterwards. The USA wanted to end the war by demonstrating to the Soviet Union that they had the atomic bomb. And they wanted to do it twice so that it wouldn't be thought of as an accident the first time they used it. It was not a heroic decision. It was not militarily necessary, as I was always lied to and told about in school. That's all there is to it. It was not a necessary thing to do. The USA just wanted to threaten the Soviet Union and make clear to the Soviet Union that they had the bomb. The USA also wanted to really quickly end the war because the Soviet Union was liberating the Korean Peninsula, and the Red Army in China, and they wanted to end the war quickly, but Japan was willing to surrender. The firebombing of Tokyo actually killed a lot more civilians than the atomic bombs. Another thing is that I believe 1 in 3 of the people that died at Hiroshima and Nagasaki were Korean slaves, right? That there were a lot of slaves of Korean descent taken from Korea to work as slaves in Japan. And a number of the people who died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were actually Korean slaves. Nobody talks about that. They weren't all Japanese. There were a lot of Korean slaves who died. Yeah, it was pretty awful. So now the big super chat, and I really do thank you for that super chat question. It was a great super chat, a great contribution to the efforts that we're doing here. And look, if you give me super chat money, this goes to what I'm doing, right? I don't just, this goes to, I out of my own funds, I fund a lot of the work of CPI and a lot of revolutionary activism. So, it helps me pay my bills, but it also, it goes to help with what we do here, and to help this project in the long term. Ceausescu. All right. Ceausescu, abortion, birth control. All right. How do we get me on the air? Well, that's great. As far as Free Speech TV, I don't know much about them. At one point, I was talking to them, folks from Free Speech TV. I was talking to them at one point, and then they were not talking to me. So I don't know what that's about, but maybe I'll hear from them again. I agree with a lot of what Free Speech TV does, so maybe at some point I'll be working with them again. Who knows? But as far as that, these YouTube lives, a lot of people watch them, right? I don't know. Do people actually watch like local access cable shows? Like, what is the viewership of Free Speech TV, right? How many more people would watch this if it was on TV, if it was being broadcast on television, right? Because a lot of people watch Netflix, right? A lot of people watch, what else? What else do people watch? People watch like TV on demand. So how many people are sitting in their house and they're flipping through the channels and like local access comes up and there's, somebody talking about communism and they watch it? I don't know how many people, honestly. I'd like to have a bigger production value for what I do here, right? That'd be great. I'd really like to have, a studio where I do this from. It'd be great if instead of whatever I do, I had, my own show to like, just talk about the kind of things I care about, interview guests, and it was not me talking into my iPhone. It was actually me doing my own show. That would be great. And, I go on Sputnik Radio a lot. I do my work with RT, and, I love the work that I do, but I'd always like to have my own show. I think that'd be great. If that could happen, if there was somebody who wanted to make me that kind of offer, that would make me smile from ear to ear, I'll tell you that much. And it would be good for the world, right, to get this message out here, right? That would be great. Who knows what could happen? Really, it's up to us. This community, it's about our community here, okay? We're a community here. It's not just one guy, it's not about me. It's about our community. I read those names, the same names each time. We know each other. This is a part of our life, what we do here. We are like a fun community, right? And what we do here is really, really beautiful, right? And it's funny because people join this community and they don't stop. They love being part of this, right? And I'm with them as they're driving to work. They're listening. We have our running jokes about unnamed diet beverage, and it's great. We're a great community here. We as a community have to expand our community. So, that's all I can say about that. We have to make this community bigger. We have to do it. And if we can do that, we can make this community bigger. We can get a bigger production value. We can really expand our capabilities. The other thing is, folks, keep in touch with me. Right? It's important that you send me emails and all that, because we never know. Okay? A friend of mine, good friend of mine, George, he was telling me, he said, I think they'll give you about 2 years. Well, that's good. But anytime it could happen. Anytime they could just say, you know what? You're done. YouTube, right? They could say, you know what, Caleb? We think you're spreading disinformation. We don't agree with you about this. We think it's disinformation. You're done. And what could I do about it? Sue them? They could do that at any point. They could just say, you know what, Caleb, you're done. There's not much I can do about it, right? They do that to people. They deplatform them all the time. People, they get their content taken down. It could happen. It could happen, right? They could do it in a BS way. They could find like 3 quick violations and just get my channel down. They could give me 3 strikes, boom, boom, boom. They could do that. Or they could just, take it down one day and say, violated terms of service, never tell me anything. Look, I mean, Dakota Lilly, his Twitter was taken down. No reason, no notice. A month later, they said he was spreading disinformation. They just took his Twitter down, right? He can't do anything about it, right? They could just, shut me down at some point, and there would be nothing I could do about it. So we need to be keeping this community intact, because there are many other platforms out there. There are many other platforms out there that if that happens, which is a very good chance that it will eventually happen, if we get big enough, if we get a big enough following on here, right? I mean, already we got Thought Slime. I said his name, Skippy the Bear. We've got Skippy the Bear. Other people attacking us and trying to inoculate people against us because of what we're doing is so important, right? But at some point, they may determine that we're getting so much done here that they'll just say you're done. And when that happens, we need to immediately set up shop on another platform, right? And we just need to, at that point, keep going on another platform. And we need to figure out what'll happen. And we need a way to let you all know about it. I have my personal website and all of that. And we just be prepared for that. One day, I'm not on YouTube anymore. You'll know to go find out where I'm at, because at some point it might happen. We never know, right? At any point, they could take this platform away from me. I've backed up a lot of my videos on BitChute. You can watch them on BitChute because I don't want them to just disappear if they take me down. But it could very well happen. They could just at some point. So be prepared for that. And when that happens, if that happens, right? Hopefully it doesn't happen. Hopefully I stay on here and keep doing what I'm doing and our audience just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But if it doesn't happen, if it does happen, I'm not stopping. I have no intention of stopping these talks. None. I am going to keep on here, keep doing this show, keep building this community. But there may come a time where YouTube doesn't allow me to do it on YouTube. So, be sure that you check me out. Be sure that we remain in touch, because I ain't going nowhere. I ain't shutting down, right? So, be sure that that if sometime you see my channel is gone, go and find out where I'm at and help me get on the next live, because I mean, there is a bunch of other platforms I can use if that happens. YouTube is the biggest one. I'm going to stay on here as long as I can, but you never know. You never know. Thank you for that great super chat. And yeah, if I could be on the air, on national television, that would be great. I would love that. All right. Tips on studying history. Well, primary sources are ideal, right? Also, check things out. There are a lot of things that are widely believed, about history that you dig into them, they're not true. Like there's quotes from Lenin out there. People say Lenin said capitalism is fascism or fascism is capitalism in decay. He never said that. That's not actually a Lenin quote. Somebody made up that Lenin said that. And that's kind of like a summation of what Lenin said. But that's not actually a quote from Lenin. There's things like that, right? That, you want to double check. Go to primary sources. Find quotes from people, right? Find actual documents. That's the best way to do things. Because often secondary sources, especially if they were, before the internet, no one could fact check things. And things are true because people said them. Look, one historical fact, widely believed. I believed this. I was doing research about the Roman Empire before I gave my talk on Rome. I had been told that Romans, they had rooms called vomitories that were for throwing up, right? I was told this. That's not true, right? Vomitories, that they existed, those were hallways in stadiums, right? And it's just they let people out. And so it's like the same word, like vomit means throw up, but it also means lets people out. The hallways through which you exited stadiums were called vomitories. But there is a book, a very prominent book that was published, a very popular book that said in it that Romans had special rooms called vomitories that they vomited in. That's not actually true. Now, the Romans did vomit at their parties, right? When Romans had parties, they would stuff themselves full of food and then vomit and eat more, right? But they didn't have a special room for it. They did it in the bathroom or in the what do you call it? The privy, the toilet area. And that actually Emperor Claudius had a long feather. He had a servant with a long feather He would stuff his face full of food, and then the servant with the long feather would stuff the feather down his throat to induce vomiting, and then he would eat more. So the practice was real, but the idea that they had rooms called vomitories, which I thought was a fact, and it's written in a number of history books, that's false. Right? Well, it's important to be able to fact check it. Primary sources, go to primary sources, eyewitness accounts, memoirs. That's the best way, to find out facts. But, but also check up-to-date information. Some old history book doesn't always have the best info. So, yeah, that's one thing. Talk to people who've been there, right? I mean, that's the best part. Like, whenever I meet an older person, especially an older person who's been in struggle, I pick their brains. And what about this? Do you remember that? Do you remember this? Do you remember what this is like? I mean, the times that I spent with old communists who remembered the 1930s were really valuable because, they could tell me things. They had knowledge. So, yeah. Ceausescu, he was leader of socialist Romania, didn't believe in abortion, didn't believe in birth control. That was probably, I assume that was because he was very much a Romanian nationalist, and he wanted to populate the country. I think Stalin also did not believe in birth control and abortion for similar reasons, right? They wanted to populate the country, right? It was kind of like we have more people to build socialism, right? William Z. Foster, when he was an anarcho-syndicalist, he actually said that revolutionaries should not have children because having more children increases the competitions. More people increases the competition for jobs and drives wages down. And that being a parent distracts from the revolutionary movement. But after the revolution, once socialism is established, it is the duty of revolutionaries to populate as much as possible in order to build a socialist abundance with the human labor, right? So, I mean, and I think that I read about when they outlawed abortion in the USSR, they made similar arguments, like it's the duty of the Soviet population to build more people, so we have more people to build socialism with. That was probably the mentality. Caleb, you sound like my grandfather. He brought my dad and aunts to the U.S. They left Ukraine after the war and the Holodomor. I appreciate your talks. Well, that's great. I'm glad I sound like your grandfather. I don't know why I sound like your grandfather, but great. I mean, I'm glad you like what I do. I hope that's a good. I mean, you said it was a good thing, and I have admiration for my grandparents. I have admiration for my own parents. So I mean, my parents, my grandparents, right? We got to learn from the older folks, right? History is no mystery, as they say, right? That you learn from the past in order to build the present. And that historical materialism is vital, right? The science of dialectical and historical materialism. So on that note, folks, I've been on here quite a while. We're going to end it. So best wishes to everyone. And remember, we need a government of action that will fight for working families. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night.